Chapter 318. Bringing the Dead Back to Life. What? What kind of technique is this? Luo Feng, a cultivator at the Dividing God stage, was not an ordinary person. He had never heard of anyone in this world who could bring the dead back to life. Even his master didn't have this ability. Yi Xian put his hands behind his back and watched Fatso Huang's change in silence. Then he nodded and murmured, "The quality of this 9-turn mysterious immortal pill is ordinary, but it's enough to bring him back to life. It seems that it's not completely useless." If the immortals heard what Yi Xian said, they would spit out blood. This 9-turn mysterious immortal pill was an excellent immortal pill, but why was it only ordinary in the hands of Yi Xian? Although the immortal pill was good, there was always a process. Yi Xian wasn't in a hurry. He was waiting for Fatso Huang to wake up. However, although Yi Xian wasn't in a hurry, Luo Feng and the others were pale. They looked at Yi Xian with horror in their eyes. There was no momentum or majesty, but Yi Xian just stood there as if he was the only one in the world. Luo Feng wanted to stand up, but there seemed to be an invisible immortal mountain pressing on him. He couldn't get up at all, and his body was trembling slightly. Yi Xian didn't perform any immortal techniques, and he wasn't bored enough to deter these ants. Because this was a difference in the level of life, it naturally brought unimaginable pressure to Luo Feng and the others. The difference between immortals and mortals could be reflected. It was like a sheep suddenly seeing the legendary 9th heaven godly dragon. How could it not tremble in body and mind? It was the same as the current situation. Luo Feng was already soaked in cold sweat. He knew that he had met an extremely terrifying cultivator. The opponent should be at least at the passing calamity stage. Otherwise, how could he be suppressed to this extent? However, no matter how hard Luo Feng thought, he couldn't figure out who Yi Xian was. As far as he knew, there were only a few people in the crossing calamity stage in this world. All of them were overlords of this world. Naturally, he knew all of them. However, he had no impression of the black-clothed man in front of him. Say. Elder. My teacher is Wu Juexian. I wonder who you are. Can you tell me your name? Luo Feng asked in a trembling voice. He lowered his posture. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't respond at all to Luo Feng's words. He only calmly looked at Fatso Huang and waited for him to wake up. In Yi Xian's eyes, Luo Feng was no different from an ant. Luo Feng didn't even attract his attention. With Luo Feng's level of training, he couldn't even compare to some of the celestial soldiers in the celestial court. Why would Yi Xian care about someone like him? Senior, this is the minister of the left of the Immortal Alliance, Lord Luo Feng, and his teacher is Wu Juexian. His fists were slightly clenched, and his body couldn't help but tremble. His trembling lips wanted to say something, but his extremely fast-beating heart made him unable to speak. Time flies, time passes, in the blink of an eye, 500 years have passed. Fatso Huang, do you still recognize me? Yi Xian smiled warmly. Wah! Suddenly, Fatso Huang seemed to have transformed into a child. He couldn't control himself and began to cry loudly. His eyes were filled with tears. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed towards Yi Xian. The heavens have eyes, the heavens have eyes. It's been 500 years, a whole 500 years. I, Fatso Huang, have waited bitterly for you for 500 years. This day has finally arrived. The Underworld's Vice-Underworld Lord, Fatso Huang, kowtows to the Underworld Lord. Fatso Huang seemed to have descended into madness. He couldn't control himself at all. He continuously kowtowed towards Yi Xian. His tears of joy and excitement flowed out uncontrollably. 500 years of waiting, 500 years of heartache. No one knew what Fatso Huang had experienced in the past 500 years. He had been at death's door the entire time, all for the sake of waiting for Yi Xian's return. The heavens did not let down those who worked hard. 500 years of waiting had finally arrived. All the hardships he had suffered in the past were nothing to Fatso Huang. That was because the person he had been waiting for had finally appeared. Fatso Huang knew that the person he had respected his entire life had never forgotten him. He had truly returned to the human world to find him. "You're already over 500 years old, why are you still crying like a child?" Yi Xian helped Fatso Huang up and patted his shoulder with a smile. "This subordinate is useless. Not only did I destroy the bloodthirsty demon sword you bestowed upon me, I even caused the underworld to cease to exist in this world." Chapter 319. Fatty Huang said guiltily. Without waiting for him to kneel down and apologize, Yi Xian pointed a finger at him and froze him in place. Then, he smiled and said, "I don't blame you for this. Don't blame yourself. Uncle Huang, this elder is." Although the little girl was young, she was very smart. Her intuition told her that the black-clothed elder in front of her was not simple. "He's your..." Before Fatso Huang could answer, Yi Xian interrupted him and said, "There's no need to mention the past." "Yes, sir." Fatso Huang quickly stopped talking, which made the little girl even more curious. However, she was smart enough not to ask. "Sir, these people are all Wu Juexian's lackeys. I want to kill them with my own hands," Fatso Huang said viciously and asked Yi Xian for instructions. "Go and come back quickly," Yi Xian said calmly. "Tell me what happened in the human world in the past 500 years. "Yes, sir." Fatso Huang bowed and strode toward Luo Feng and the others. The conversation between the two fell into Luo Feng's ears, which made him tremble silently. He looked at Yi Xian with a look of extreme horror. Luo Feng didn't know who Yi Xian was. However, he was Wu Juexian's disciple. Although he was only 300 years old, he had cultivated to the dividing god stage and had always been valued by Wu Juexian. He only knew that Fatso Huang and his master were old acquaintances and used to be close friends. However, because of Fatso Huang's bloodthirsty demon sword and great sky demon technique, they became enemies. However, one year, Fatso Huang came with the bloodthirsty demon sword and scolded Wu Juexian as a traitor. He also vaguely mentioned the words, "Sir," "Immortal," "Human World," and "Return." Back then, he was still young and didn't know what those words meant. However, he clearly remembered that when Fatty Huang said those words, his master, who was like a god in his heart, actually trembled slightly. There was even a trace of fear that he had never seen before in his master's eyes. This memory had been hidden deep in his mind, and it gradually faded away with the passage of time. However, what he saw today immediately brought back memories of Luo Feng's childhood. When he thought about this scene again, an indescribable terror filled his mind. Could it be? Could it be that the person that Master was afraid of was this mysterious man in black? Unfortunately, before Luo Feng could understand the crux of the matter, Fatso Huang had already arrived in front of them. With a raise of his hand, he sliced the 10 or so cultivators into 1,000 pieces. His sinister and vicious methods were simply unbearable to watch. "Ah!" They screamed miserably, wishing they were dead. Under the extremely terrifying torture, the dozen or so immortal cultivators died without an intact body. Even their primordial spirits were chopped into ashes by Fatso Huang. They did not even have the chance to be reincarnated. Luo Feng. Mortals didn't even have the right to live in such a luxurious manner. Only cultivators had the right to live in such a luxurious manner. Fatty Huang was still as ruthless as ever. This manor was originally the residence of an Aurus core stage cultivator. When he directly killed this cultivator, he naturally seized this manor and used it as a temporary place to stay. The stream flowed and the wind chimes rang. In the courtyard, a stone table, 2 stone stools, a pot of tea, and 2 jade cups. Other than that, there was nothing else. Yi Xian sat in the middle. He took a sip of the tea and frowned slightly. He then put the cup down. Obviously, After spending 500 years in the earth immortal world, Yi Xian only drank immortal tea. This sort of mortal tea was hard for him to swallow. Even though he hadn't been by Yi Xian's side for 500 years, Fatso Huang wasn't unfamiliar with Yi Xian. Naturally, he could feel Yi Xian's thoughts. "Sir, the things in this mortal world can't compare to the immortal world." Without waiting for Fatso Huang to finish, Yi Xian smiled and said, "No matter. Tell me what happened in these 500 years." When it came to serious matters, Fatso Huang clenched his fists. He was silent for a full 10 breaths before he calmed down his surging emotions. "Back then, after you successfully passed the calamity," as Fatso Huang spoke slowly, the past events that had been sealed for 500 years were narrated one by one. Chapter 320. 500 years ago. Yi Xian transcended tribulation to become an immortal in front of everyone, then disappeared without a trace from the eyes of the world. No one knew where he went, but everyone close to him guessed that Yi Xian must have ascended to the immortal world. It was also a month after Yi Xian's disappearance that the world's spiritual energy began to recover. The once useless immortal cultivation methods became treasures in people's eyes. People no longer needed to consume blood to cultivate, and orthodox immortal cultivators emerged within 100 years. In the underworld, elites from all over the world were gathered. Immortal cultivators were as numerous as carps crossing the river. In the era of the recovery of spiritual energy, batch after batch of rising stars emerged. Fatso Huang was the master of the underworld appointed by Yi Xian. In the days when Yi Xian had just left, the underworld could be said to be united and listened to Fatso Huang's orders because of Yi Xian's lingering influence. Although they did not approve of Fatso Huang in their hearts, they tacitly approved of him as the master of the underworld. However, human desires were endless. In the past 100 years, too many geniuses emerged from all over the world. Their cultivation improved by leaps and bounds. With the supply of endless spiritual energy between heaven and earth, their cultivation rose steadily. The members of the underworld were not willing to fall behind. With the cultivation methods passed down by Yi Xian, their cultivation improved by leaps and bounds. It could be said that they were the world's #1 force. Where there were people, there would be conflicts. Where there were conflicts, there would be disputes. This was a principle that had never changed since time immemorial. No one was willing to submit to others. Under the urging of the desire for power, the underworld gradually became disharmonious and was vaguely divided into several camps. Wu Juexian, the person with the strongest cultivation in the underworld, was worshipped by many members of the underworld. However, he was only a deputy master of the underworld. Monk Yuan Su, with the recovery of spiritual energy between heaven and earth, his Buddhist and demonic techniques shone brightly. In just a few decades, he had caught up to Wu Juexian. Not only did he have a large number of followers in the underworld, but there were also many talented people who took Monk Yuan Su as their master and joined the underworld. The 3 team leaders of underworld were Viper, Heartless, and Steamed Bun. These 3 were once on the same level as Fatso Huang and were also part of the 4 team leaders. However, after the Spirit Qi revival, their cultivation base improved by leaps and bounds. Although they could not compare to Wu Juexian and Monk Yuan Su, they had left Fatso Huang in the dust. With the growth of his cultivation came endless ambition. Although Fatso Huang was personally appointed by Yi Xian, as time passed and the cultivation bases of Wu Juexian's disciples surpassed that of Fatso Huang, the entire underworld gradually fell apart. Although Yi Xian had taught Fatso Huang the Great Sky Demon technique before leaving the human realm, and even bestowed the bloodthirsty demon sword to him, Fatso Huang's aptitude was too ordinary. No matter how hard he cultivated, he was still inferior to everyone else. Time was the most merciless of all. It was also the easiest for people to forget certain things. When Yi Xian still hadn't appeared 100 years later, the lingering influence of the past gradually faded away in hell. What followed was the restlessness that had been suppressed for 100 years. Although Fatty Huang's methods were unfathomable and he was vicious, his cultivation base was still there, causing him to gradually be looked down upon by the people of the underworld. The huge underworld gradually fell apart. Although there were some external factors, most of it was due to internal conflicts. Wu Juexian's line and Yuan Su's line were like fire and water. The three team leaders each had their own way of doing things and had secretly clashed countless times. Even when Fatso Huang tried to stop them, it was useless. Which of the people of Underworld was not a fiendish person? Wu Juexian was once the #1 expert of the East. Monk Yuan Su was the founder of the Small Thunder Temple. The three team leaders were all people who had committed heinous crimes. None of the members of Underworld were kind men and women. It could be said that they were all extremely vicious people. Without Yi Xian's suppression, the entire underworld was no longer as strong as it used to be. An unimaginable civil war finally began. In one night, underworld completely withered. Those who died were injured. Everyone gathered at underworld's headquarters and directly announced to Fatso Huang that they were no longer part of underworld. Fatso Huang knew that he did not have Yi Xian's power and influence and could not suppress these people. However, the underworld was created by Yi Xian. If it were to fall apart in his hands, how could he face Yi Xian? On that day, Fatso Huang seemed to have aged by several decades. He told Wu Juexian and the others that he was willing to hand over the master of underworld and was even willing to teach them the great sky demon technique as long as they could stay in underworld. Unfortunately, the ambition of man was limitless. How could the underworld, which was already in ruins, keep them? It was also on that day that 3 terrifying immortal cultivators appeared at underworld's headquarters. No one knew the origins of these 3 people, but their cultivation bases were extremely unpredictable. These 3 people were 2 men and 1 woman. They were known as the Deputy Alliance leaders of the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. Wu Juexian and the others had also joined the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. It was only at that moment that Fatso Huang understood. It turned out that Immortal Wu Juexian and the others had joined the Immortal Cultivation Alliance at some point in time. The underworld's falling apart was also greatly related to the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. The underworld ceased to exist overnight. The Immortal Cultivation Alliance even forced Fatso Huang to hand over the Great Sky Demon Technique and the Bloodthirsty Demon Sword. They even wanted him to submit to the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. However, how could Fatso Huang be willing to do that? Naturally, an unimaginable war had broken out. In the blink of an eye, his close comrades in arms had turned into enemies. Whether it was Wu Juexian or Monk Yuan Su, when these people personally attacked him, he had to use the 3 strands of blood energy that Yi Xian had bestowed upon him. In that battle, Wu Juexian and the others were severely injured. The 3 deputy alliance leaders of the Immortal Cultivation Alliance had even fled in a panic. However, what followed was an endless pursuit of Fatso Huang. After hundreds of years, the 3 strands of blood energy that Yi Xian had bestowed upon him had all been used up. He could only hide here and there, hoping that one day in the future, Yi Xian would be able to return to the human realm. Of course, not every member of the underworld was a traitor. In this battle, Gu Beichen's cultivation base was unparalleled. He fought side by side with the Death God's personal guards. However, in the end, his fate was unknown. As for some of the senior members of the underworld, they had long been disheartened in the face of the underworld's falling apart. One by one, they left the world, not wanting to participate in these disputes. Some of them hid in the depths of the mountains, while others became ordinary citizens. The underworld no longer existed in this world. However, this was not the end. The Yi family of the capital was annihilated overnight. Yi Ping and his wife died in battle at home. Yi Xian's mother also went missing in this battle. All the members of the Yi family were hunted down by a mysterious force. They hid in a sorry state for hundreds of years. In order to ensure that the Yi family would not die out, Fatso Huang went to war everywhere, hoping to preserve the bloodline of the Yi family. 500 years had passed. Be it the Yi family or the underworld, they had all disappeared in the long river of history. All the history of Yi Xian's existence had long been erased by the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. The current human realm was ruled by the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. The former countries of the world no longer existed in this world. The Immortal Cultivation Alliance was also the supreme overlord of the human realm. The world did not know that a supreme divine king had once appeared in this world 500 years ago. Perhaps, only the immortal cultivators who were alive back then knew of Yi Xian's existence. Chapter 321. As Fatty Huang slowly narrated, Yi Xian quietly listened. There wasn't the slightest bit of anger on his face. However, his fingers tapped on the table, continuously making tapping sounds. It was obvious that his heart wasn't as calm as it seemed on the surface. I understand, Yi Xian said calmly. Looking at Yi Xian's calm expression, Fatso Huang clenched his fists and said unwillingly, "Sir, now that you've returned, with your Tongtian ability, you'll definitely be able to rebuild the underworld and wipe out the Immortal Cultivation Alliance and those traitors." Ha! Suddenly, Yi Xian smiled. He put his hands behind his back and looked at the sky, saying, "There is no eternal dynasty in this world, and there is no invincible force. Since the underworld no longer exists, there is no need for it to appear again." At this point, Yi Xian paused for a moment. The smile on his face had disappeared, and he said in a gloomy voice, "However, I really want to know, who gave Wu Juexian and the others the courage to betray the underworld?" Yi Xian knew Wu Juexian very well. He was a martial arts fanatic and did not have much desire for power. For him to betray the underworld, there must be someone behind it. Without even thinking, Yi Xian knew that this person was the one who controlled the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. Moreover, Yi Xian had a faint premonition that not only Wu Juexian, but also Monk Yuan Su and the three team leaders knew that he had ascended to the immortal realm. Even if they were unwilling to submit to Fatso Huang, they would never go after Fatso Huang. After all, these people had to leave a way out for themselves. Obviously, since these people dared to betray him, the person behind the scenes could only be the master who controlled the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. The person who controlled the Immortal Cultivation Alliance should know him and know how terrifying he was. Otherwise, they would not have wiped out the Yi family and erased his existence from history. However, no matter how hard Yi Xian thought, he could not figure out who this person was. Before he left the mortal dimension, all of his enemies had already been annihilated by him. Just who could this person be? As for the Yi family in the capital, Yi Xian had no feelings for them at all. In this world, perhaps the only people he cared about were Yi Mu and Yi Ling, her. As for the life and death of the other members of the Yi family, naturally, he would not be affected in the slightest. Do you know who the leader of the Immortal Cultivation Alliance is? Yi Xian asked calmly. I don't know. Fatso Huang was slightly ashamed as he said, this subordinate has made many inquiries, but the person who controls the Immortal Cultivation Alliance is extremely mysterious. He always wears a golden mask, and no one knows who he really is. At this point, Fatso Huang frowned and said, furthermore, this person was the first cultivator to reach the tribulation passing stage 300 years ago. He left Wu Juexian far behind. Yes. After hearing Fatso Huang's answer, Yi Xian nodded. This made him even more curious about this person. However, Yi Xian's mind did not waver at all. No matter who the other party was, in Yi Xian's eyes, he could only be an ant. In the end, he would die without a burial place. In Yi Xian's original intention, he had returned to the human realm this time only because of the bloodthirsty demon sword's explosion. He wanted to come back and see what had happened. He also wanted to bring Fatso Huang back to the Earth Immortal realm and train him well. But now, Yi Xian had changed his mind. A smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. However, when Fatso Huang saw his smile, it also made Fatso Huang's breath stop. However, there was a flash of ecstasy in his eyes. This was because he knew that although Yi Xian looked calm, he was angry in his heart. In Fatso Huang's understanding, if Yi Xian was angry, he would naturally want a sea of blood and mountains of corpses. There had never been an exception to this. Fatso Huang. Your subordinate is here. Take my token and send a message to the world. Tell them that I have returned. I would like to see how many members of the underworld are still loyal to me after 500 years. Yi Xian casually tossed out a command medallion and had Fatty Huang catch it. He even excitedly bowed towards Yi Xian before quickly walking towards the outside world. The underworld lord's token. There was only one token in this world. It was also Yi Xian's exclusive symbol as the underworld lord. When he left the human realm in the past, the underworld lord's token had naturally been with him. Every member of the underworld knew that seeing the token was like seeing Yi Xian himself. However, no one knew if the underworld lord's token still had the power of the past after 500 years. The boundless mountains. The mountains were continuous and the terrain was steep. The peaks that reached into the clouds were connected to the heavens and the earth. Countless immortal cultivators crossed each other in the void. The spiritual energy that filled the sky and the earth rippled between the mountains. This was the headquarters of the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. The strongest immortal cultivators in the human realm lived there. It was also the holy land of humans. Star Palace. Wu Xian sat high up in the main seat. He was holding an ancient book and reading it. The spiritual energy around his body rippled slightly, making people feel a sense of reverence. In 500 years, Wu Xian stepped into the passing calamity stage. He was one of the strongest immortal cultivators in the human realm. He was revered by everyone and was a supreme being. The 8 great disciples, 16 generals, and 32 great generals were all standing below him. They were all holding a cultivation technique manual and studying it. 2 extremely beautiful servants were dancing in the palace. The sound of a zither was like a deity's melody. In the dense spiritual energy, it was as if one was in a paradise. Teacher. Suddenly, an extremely discordant voice came from outside the palace. Luo Feng had directly barged into the Star Palace and had the 2 dancers quickly leave. This attracted everyone's curiosity. One must know that Luo Feng was an extremely well-behaved person. He was also Wu Xian's favorite disciple. For him to barge into the Star Palace without any notice meant that something big must have happened. Wu Xian frowned, but he didn't say anything. Feng, why are you so flustered? What happened? Wu Xian asked calmly. Clearly, as a passing calamity stage immortal cultivator, there was nothing in this world that could make Wu Xian's heart waver. No matter what happened, it wasn't worth mentioning in his eyes. Teacher, I found Fatso Huang, but... Luo Feng wanted to say something but stopped. He didn't know how to explain what happened to him. Speaking of Fatso Huang, Wu Xian's eyes narrowed. Is he dead or alive? Did you get the Great Sky Demon Technique and the Bloodthirsty Demon Blade? Teacher, Fatso Huang was saved by someone. He even destroyed the Bloodthirsty Demon Blade himself. However, I got the Great Sky Demon Technique. Luo Feng said and handed over the Great Sky Demon Technique. This made Wu Xian's face light up. He immediately took it and flipped through it. After about 10 breaths, Wu Xian carefully put away the Great Sky Demon Technique. After that, he muttered to himself, it really is the Great Sky Demon Technique. This technique is extremely strange. If Fatso Huang wasn't talented enough, he would have entered the passing calamity stage long ago. Chapter 322. Feng, you did well. Go back to the Hidden Scriptures Pavilion and choose a technique. Consider it. Without waiting for Wu Xian to finish, Luo Feng bowed and said in a trembling voice, Teacher, I have something to report. Looking at Luo Feng's pale face, Wu Xian's eyes focused. Feng, what happened? Luo Feng did not dare to delay. He quickly described how Yi Xian saved Fatso Huang. This made Wu Ju Xian frown, and a look of surprise flashed in his eyes. A single pill brought Fatso Huang back from the dead? Wu Ju Xian muttered to himself. His voice was serious. As a cultivator at the passing calamity stage, Wu Ju Xian understood that it was impossible for a single pill to bring someone back from the dead, unless the pill was a legendary immortal pill. But how could there be an immortal pill in this world? You mean to say that you didn't even have the ability to fight back against the mysterious man in black? Wu Ju Xian said in a low voice. If Fatso Huang hadn't spared your life, you would have died at his hands. Indeed, Luo Feng said, ashamed. What a joke. Suddenly, a middle-aged man scolded Luo Feng. Brother, if that mysterious man in black was a passing calamity stage cultivator, then why would Fatso Huang let you live? And why would he let you bring the sky demon technique back to teacher? Isn't this ridiculous? After this person finished speaking, everyone present nodded. Even Wu Ju Xian's face was filled with disbelief. Teacher, Fatso Huang asked me to bring you a message. Luo Feng knew that he could not explain this strange situation, so he could only brace himself and report to Wu Ju Xian. What message? Wu Ju Xian asked. Fatso Huang said that the man from 500 years ago has returned. He wants you to wash your neck and wait for death. Luo Feng reported truthfully. However, he was afraid that Wu Ju Xian would blame him, so he did not dare to look into Wu Ju Xian's eyes. How dare you? How dare you? Without waiting for Wu Ju Xian to speak, everyone present began to angrily rebuke Luo Feng. Junior brother, have you lost your mind? How dare you be so disrespectful to master? Luo Feng, you've been bewitched by Fatso Huang, you have to know that your teacher, he, clang. Suddenly, just as everyone was reprimanding Luo Feng, a strange sound entered everyone's ears, causing everyone to look towards the source of the sound. However, when they saw the scene in front of them, everyone's faces turned sluggish, causing the entire stellar hall to become deathly silent. Perhaps Luo Feng felt that something was amiss, so he raised his head slightly to look at Wu Ju Xian. However, what he saw made his expression change drastically. He was completely speechless. At this moment, the jade cup in Wu Ju Xian's hand fell to the ground as his face became extremely pale. Even his body began to tremble uncontrollably. Fear leapt out from his eyes as if he had encountered something extremely terrifying. In the hearts of the disciples, Wu Ju Xian was a godlike existence. Even if the heavens fell and the earth cracked, he would not be moved. However, what did they just see? Just a single sentence, and Wu Ju Xian had lost his soul to such a state. This was something that they could not imagine. They could not understand. As one of the most powerful beings of the human race, what in the world could possibly cause Wu Ju Xian to feel such fear? You. Say it again. Say it again. Wu Ju Xian tried his best to suppress his feelings of fear, but his words could not stop trembling. Luo Feng was suddenly jolted awake. He did not dare to delay any further and repeated his words once more. Pang! Wu Ju Xian sat paralyzed on the white jade throne. His eyes were wide open, as if he had lost his soul. He did not regain his senses for a long time. This scene also caused everyone to be as silent as cicadas in winter. No one dared to make a sound. However, a bad feeling arose in everyone's hearts. Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Back then when Sir ascended to the immortal world, there was no way he could have returned to the human world. Fake. It's all fake, Wu Ju Xian trembled as he murmured. His face was extremely distorted, but the fear in his eyes could not be stopped. No one knew who the Sir that Wu Ju Xian spoke of was, but everyone present had heard the words, ascended to the immortal world. This also caused them to be shocked speechless. They felt that there was a shocking secret contained within. At this moment, Luo Feng's face was pale. He had a feeling that the mysterious black-clothed man was not ordinary. Now that Wu Juexian was acting like this, it clearly proved his guess. Back off, everyone back off. Suddenly, Wu Juexian let out a low roar, causing everyone present to bow and retreat. However, before Luo Feng could leave, Wu Juexian said in a trembling voice, "Feng, you stay." Soon, only the master and disciple were left in the hall. Wu Juexian personally performed a technique to completely seal off the hall, ensuring that the conversation between the two would not be heard by outsiders. Seeing how serious Wu Juexian was, Luo Feng was stunned. He knew that things were not as simple as they seemed. He could feel that Wu Juexian, who was standing in front of him, had lost the demeanor of a powerful fighter who had passed the calamity. It was as if he had turned into a helpless child. Wang! Wu Juexian waved his hand, and a dim yellow scroll painting appeared in his hand. His hand that was holding the scroll was trembling slightly, but he still slowly pushed it open, and a dim yellow scroll painting unfurled. Feng, you have to look carefully. Look seriously. See if the person in this scroll is that mysterious black-clothed man. Wu Juexian pressed hard on Luo Feng's shoulder. Even though he tried his best to calm his voice, if one listened carefully, they would discover that there was a slight tremor in his voice. Luo Feng nodded solemnly and looked towards the scroll. When he saw Yi Xian's handsome face in the scroll, he quickly nodded and said, "Yes, it is indeed this person. He is the one who saved Fatso Huang." Pa! As Luo Feng finished speaking, the scroll in Wu Juexian's hand fell to the ground. His entire body was extremely stiff, and a hint of bitterness appeared on his face. "It is indeed, sir. It is indeed, sir. I should have known. I should have known. Only sir can bring Fatso Huang back to life." Wu Juexian laughed bitterly and shook his head. A hint of despair appeared in his eyes. "What do I do? What do I do?" Wu Juexian paced back and forth in the hall. The aura around his body was extremely chaotic. It was obvious that he had fallen into an indescribable panic. No one knew more about Yi Xian's terror than Wu Juexian. 500 years ago, Yi Xian was already a passing calamity stage cultivator. He had even passed the terrifying 9 Heavens Immortal trial and entered the legendary Earth Immortal sector. 500 years later, Yi Xian had returned to this world. He was at least a heavenly immortal. Who in this world could stop him? As for the members of the underworld who have been living in seclusion in the city, they will definitely come out to find you when they know that you have returned to the human realm, Fatso Huang said in a low voice. Yi Xian nodded and did not pay too much attention to this matter. He looked in the direction of the capital and said, 500 years have passed. Do you know if my little sister is still in the human realm? Don't worry, mister. Although the Yi clan has been destroyed, Miss Ling Er has married into the Tuoba clan. Her husband, Tuoba Yuntian, has a talent that is hard to come by in 10,000 years and has already reached the form synthesis stage. Miss Ling Er has also become a cultivator long ago and is still in the human realm, Fatso Huang replied truthfully. After knowing that his little sister was fine, Yi Xian nodded and said softly, I haven't seen her in 500 years. I wonder how she is now. Wait for me here. I will return in a few days. Yes, mister, Fatso Huang bowed. Yi Xian rode on a black cloud and disappeared from the manor. He was heading in the direction of the capital's Tuoba clan. Since the recovery of spiritual qi 500 years ago, the Tuoba clan had risen to prominence. They were one of the forces that could not be underestimated. Today, 500 years later, the Tuoba clan seemed to have transcended worldly affairs. Cloud-Gazing Mountain was a spiritual mountain on the outskirts of the capital. Since the recovery of spiritual qi, Cloud-Gazing Mountain was rich in spiritual qi and had turned into a paradise. The Tuoba clan had also moved here. Clouds and mist surrounded the mountain and spiritual qi steamed. Yi Xian strolled in the sky and calmly sensed his little sister's aura. He looked down through the clouds and a manor appeared in front of him. Cloud-gazing mountain peak. An ancient manor filled with an ancient charm. A large number of cultivators crisscrossed through the mountains and fields. There were even cultivators riding on immortal light shooting out from the manor. Suddenly, Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and a trace of confusion flashed through his eyes. As an overarching heaven Xian celestial, he was very sensitive to immortal qi. He actually sensed a faint trace of immortal qi in the Tuoba family. Although the trace of immortal qi was very weak, it was indeed there. Someone in the Tuoba clan has become an immortal. Yi Xian was puzzled. However, when he tried to sense it again, the immortal qi had disappeared. This made Yi Xian narrow his eyes and a trace of confusion flashed through his eyes. Yi Xian stepped down from the sky and followed Yi Ling's aura into the depths of the manor. There was another world in the depths of the manor. There was a clear pool, a cottage, and a grave. There was nothing else. In front of the grave, a middle-aged lady knelt on the ground and was mumbling something. Although Yi Xian didn't see this woman's face, just by sensing her bloodline, Yi Xian was certain that this was Yi Ling from 500 years later. Looking at his little sister's back, Yi Xian's eyes were a little dazed. In the depths of his memory, his little sister should still be a young girl. However, 500 years had passed and the young girl of the past had already grown up. Mother, Ling, has never dared to forget about second brother and sister-in-law's revenge. No matter who the other party is, I will definitely kill him, Yi Ling, muttered to herself as a painful aura bloomed around her. Mother's grave? Yi Xian ignored the existence of his little sister. When he saw Mother Ye's name on the tombstone, a trace of sadness flashed through his eyes. Yes, 500 years had passed. Mother was just a mortal in the past. Even if the world's spirit qi had recovered, the lifespan of a mortal was still limited. How could she still be alive? Yi Xian strolled to the front of the grave and knelt down silently. However, when he appeared beside Yi Ling, her expression changed. Who are you? How did you get in? Yi Ling asked in a delicate voice. It had to be known that this place was forbidden to the Tuoba family. Other than herself and her husband, Tuoba Yuntian, no one else was allowed to enter. Furthermore, there were extremely powerful restrictions all around. But now, someone had dared to enter without permission. This was simply unimaginable to Yi Ling. She was extremely angry. No matter who the person was, he would definitely be severely punished. Mother, I'm back. Faced with Yi Ling's delicate rebuke, Yi Xian did not have the slightest bit of response. In front of Mother Ye's grave, he kowtowed 3 times. When his words fell into Yi Ling's ears, it also made her beautiful face become sluggish. She carefully looked at Yi Xian's face. 500 years could make a person forget many things. However, when Yi Xian's face was reflected in Yi Ling's eyes, it also made Yi Ling become sluggish and silent. Only her delicate body trembled slightly. Am I dreaming? A smear of mist appeared in Yi Ling's eyes. When the tears blurred her eyes, she hurriedly wiped them away. She stared at Yi Xian's face, not daring to blink in the slightest. It was as if she was afraid. Afraid that if she blinked, the person in front of her would disappear without a trace. Chapter 324. Brother. It had been 500 years. When that simple word came out of Yi Ling's mouth, it was as if she had used up all her strength. She even suddenly leaped into Yi Xian's arms as silent tears flowed out of her eyes. Yi Xian hugged his little sister calmly with a touch of warmth in his eyes because the person in his arms was also his only family in this world. For the sake of the Tongtian immortal Tao and for the sake of dominating the 9 heavens, he gave up his family in the mortal world. This time, seeing his family again after 500 years made him feel extremely emotional. "Silly girl, don't cry," Yi Xian comforted softly. "Brother, where have you been for the past 500 years? Do you know how much I miss you?" Yi Ling's eyes were red and tears flowed uncontrollably. She even continuously pounded Yi Xian's chest, as if she wanted to vent the depression that she had been feeling for the past 500 years. Yi Ling was no longer the young girl she used to be. In the past 500 years, she had long turned into a mature lady. However, the 500 years did not leave any traces on Yi Xian's body. He was still as young and handsome as he was back then. How did mother die? Yi Xian continuously comforted his little sister until her emotions stabilized. Yi Xian also asked the question in his heart. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Yi Ling hurriedly wiped away her tears and said, "Back then, the Yi family was destroyed by a mysterious force." As Yi Ling explained, Yi Xian also gradually learned some of the truth of that year. When the Yi family was destroyed back then, Yi Ling's husband, Tuoba Yuntian, led the clan to rescue them. However, they were no match for the mysterious force, but they still managed to rescue Mother Yi and bring her back to the Tuoba family. Due to Yi Ping's death, Mother Yi was devastated and finally passed away one day 10 years later. During these hundreds of years, Yi Ling had also been investigating who destroyed the Yi family. Finally, Yi Ling found some clues that pointed to the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. Yi Ling was almost certain that it was the Immortal Cultivation Alliance that destroyed the Yi family. Yi Ling wanted revenge, but she was too weak. After 500 years, she had only cultivated to the nascent soul stage. How could she be a match for the Cultivation Alliance? Although Yi Ling's husband was a body integration stage cultivator and the Tuoba family was also a cultivation clan, in the eyes of the Cultivation Alliance, the Tuoba family was just an ant. They didn't put them in their eyes at all. Following Yi Ling's slow narration, Yi Xian quietly listened. His entire person became silent, but a strange light quietly flashed through his eyes. Yi Xian had a question, a very big question. Although the destruction of the underworld was partly due to internal strife, a large part of it was caused by the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. Since the person who controlled the Immortal Cultivation Alliance destroyed the Yi family, why didn't he kill Mother Yi? Instead, he allowed the Tuoba family to successfully rescue Mother Yi. The most important question was that the Immortal Cultivation Alliance hunted down the bloodline of the Yi family all over the world, but they clearly knew that Mother Yi and Yi Ling were in the Tuoba family. Why didn't they come looking for them in these hundreds of years? When all the questions were connected together, a light flashed through Yi Xian's mind, causing him to have a guess in his heart. However, whether this guess was correct or not, he needed to verify it step by step. While Yi Xian was deep in thought, Yi Ling bit her lips and said hatefully, "Brother, now that you're back, with your cultivation, you can definitely destroy the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. You must avenge second brother and the others." "Mother." Suddenly. Before Yi Xian could reply, the sound of footsteps came from outside. 2 men quickly walked over. When they saw Yi Xian holding Yi Ling their expressions changed greatly. The young man's cultivation was at the golden core stage. He directly took out a sword light and was about to kill Yi Xian. "How dare you? Who are you? Quickly let go of my mother." "Nianchuan, stop." As Yi Ling reprimanded the young man, the sword light in the young man's hand dissipated. He looked at his mother with a puzzled expression. "Mother, you unfilial son, kneel." Yi Ling was no longer weak. She had the attitude of a strict mother. This made the young man's expression turn bitter, but he still knelt down. "Brother, this is my and Yuntian's son. His name is Tuoba Nianchuan. He has always been reckless. Brother, don't blame him." Yi Ling smiled bitterly. Hearing his mother's words, Tuoba Nianchuan's expression froze. He looked at Yi Xian curiously. Brother? Yi Ling, reprimanded, unfilial son, quickly come and greet your uncle. He is your mother's blood brother. Nianchuan greets uncle. Tuoba Nianchuan hastily bowed to Yi Xian. But when he looked at Yi Xian, he was clearly extremely curious. For as long as he could remember, he had always heard his mother talk about this uncle of his that he had never met. She had even said that this uncle of his was an unrivaled existence. But Tuoba Nianchuan didn't believe it. He had always thought that his father was the strongest man. Looking at Tuoba Nianchuan, Yi Xian could faintly see a trace of Yi Ling, silhouette between his brows. That caused him to be slightly dazed. He hadn't expected that after 500 years, his little sister would already have a son. A medicinal pill appeared in Yi Xian's hand, and he passed it over to Tuoba Nianchuan as he said, "This is a soul condensation pill. It can help you break through a great realm, and it can be considered a greeting gift from uncle." Receiving the medicinal pill from Yi Xian, Tuoba Nianchuan was in a daze. He clearly didn't believe this uncle of his had suddenly appeared. "Dad, can this pill really help me break through a realm?" Tuoba Nianchuan turned to look at his father. Tuoba Yuntian was clearly a body integration cultivator. His standards were naturally higher than his own. Furthermore, Tuoba Yuntian had always been someone he idolized. "Child, do you know who your uncle is? How can the medicinal pill he gave you be fake?" Yi Ling's voice was stern. Tuoba Nianchuan hastily put away the medicinal pill. Clearly, he had great respect for his mother. How could he dare to say anything? "Husband, my big brother has returned." Yi Ling happily walked over to her husband. She even pulled him by the arm and walked over to Yi Xian. Tuoba Yuntian was the current head of the Tuoba family. His cultivation base was at the body integration stage. Although the Tuoba family couldn't be said to be world-renowned under his leadership, it was still a power that couldn't be underestimated. He had sword-like eyebrows, bright eyes, and a heroic bearing. He gave off a righteous and awe-inspiring aura. This was the impression Yi Xian had of Tuoba Yuntian. Looking at Yi Ling's husband, Yi Xian vaguely remembered that before he had left the human world, he had hurriedly met this person. Back then, Tuoba Yuntian had been shyly married to Yi Ling. 500 years had passed, and the two of them already had a child. It had to be said that time really didn't spare people. "Tuoba Yuntian greets my big brother." Tuoba Yuntian had a smile on his face as he solemnly bowed to Yi Xian. However, his eyes narrowed slightly, but they quickly disappeared. "Good. Just as Yi Xian was about to say something, his voice abruptly stopped. His gaze towards Tuoba Yuntian slightly narrowed, causing Tuoba Yuntian's expression to slightly change. However, he was still calm and composed, and there was no abnormality in his expression. Chapter 325. Big Brother, what's wrong? Perhaps Yi Ling felt that something was wrong, so she was afraid that her husband had done something wrong and angered Yi Xian. "Ha!" Yi Xian smiled and said, "It's nothing. I'm just happy for you. You've married such an outstanding husband and have such a happy family." Hearing Yi Xian's words, Yi Ling let out a sigh of relief. Then she hugged Tuoba Yuntian's arm and smiled happily at Yi Xian. "Big brother, Yuntian has been very good to me all these years. Now that you're back, you must stay here. In a few days, we'll settle the score with the Cultivation Alliance." Following Yi Ling's words, Tuoba Yuntian smiled and nodded. "Big brother, Ling has been thinking about you all these years. You're also the person I've always admired. I still have many questions about cultivation that I'd like to ask you." Seeing Yi Ling's happy expression, Yi Xian slowly nodded and smiled. "If that's the case, then I'll stay here for a few days." A waning moon hung in the sky, and the stars in the sky flickered. The bright white moonlight sprinkled down, and it illuminated the courtyard to the point that it was spotless. A gust of wind blew over, causing Yi Xian's hair to flutter in the wind. However, the aura around his body slightly fluctuated. It was obvious that his current mood wasn't calm. "Little sister, what do you want me to do?" Yi Xian sighed. A trace of killing intent flashed in his eyes before it disappeared without a trace. Today, Yi Xian came to the Tuoba family to see his only family in the mortal world. After that, he would leave. However, when he saw Tuoba Yuntian, he changed his mind and decided to stay. This was because Yi Xian could see through Tuoba Yuntian's cultivation. Even though Tuoba Yuntian tried his best to hide it, how could he hide it from the eyes of an all-heaven Xian immortal? Tuoba Yuntian was not a body integration stage cultivator. He was a true immortal. He was a heavenly immortal and was the second person to become an immortal in the human world. Yi Xian was very sure that he didn't see wrongly, nor would he see wrongly. However, Yi Xian did not expose this matter in front of him. After all, he was his sister's husband. A person who had become an immortal staying in the mortal world and hiding his cultivation was a very strange thing. This made Yi Xian think of the things that had happened in the past 500 years. Yi Xian already had a vague conjecture, but this conjecture was too cruel. If this conjecture was true, when his little sister found out the truth, it might destroy her life of happiness. Yi Xian's expression was calm. Celestial light swirled around him. He looked up at the waning moon in the sky and sighed. He just stood there quietly in the courtyard. No one knew what he was thinking. Sleepless under the moon, his heart was heavy. Yi Ling was in a sweet dream. She did not know that her husband was no longer beside her bed. He was standing alone in the courtyard. He obviously went to the Earth Immortal realm. Why did he come back? Why? Tuoba Yuntian's expression was gloomy. He was muttering to himself in the courtyard. When he opened and closed his eyes, there was a flash of fear. It was obvious that he was not calm. Did he discover me? Tuoba Yuntian paced back and forth in the courtyard. Yi Xian's face appeared in his mind from time to time. Today, Yi Xian's arrival was immediately known to him. When he saw Yi Xian's real body, his heart was in turmoil. Fortunately, he was very shrewd and did not show any strange expression. Although I have successfully passed the tribulation and become an immortal, I can't see through his cultivation at all. I'm afraid Yi Xian has already stepped into the profound immortal realm. He is an entire realm higher than me, Tuoba Yuntian said gloomily. His expression was even more uncertain. However, he did not know that his every move was completely seen by Yi Xian. This also made Yi Xian sigh. He knew that his guess was true. The next morning, the sun rose. Yi Ling's family of 3 came to visit Yi Xian. Amidst Yi Ling's laughter, the family had a very pleasant breakfast. However, Yi Xian had already abstained from eating for many years. He simply tasted a few mouthfuls of the food that Yi Ling personally made and did not touch it again. Big brother, I am busy with family matters. I will go and deal with them first. After that, I will hold a welcoming dinner for you, Tuoba Yuntian said apologetically. It's fine. A worthy younger brother, feel free to do what you need to do, Yi Xian said calmly. Ling, you haven't reunited with your big brother for many years. Don't neglect your big brother. Before he left, Tuoba Yuntian earnestly instructed Yi Ling, and then he left the dining table. Uncle, mother has always mentioned you in these past few years. She said that your cultivation is invincible in the world. Is that true? Tuoba Nianchuan spoke out curiously. Obviously, since he was young, he'd always heard his mother talk about Yi Xian's strength. This caused him to be extremely curious about exactly what cultivation this mysterious uncle of his possessed. Look at that day. Yi Xian smiled warmly. When his palm and fingers swept through the sky, the winds and clouds in the boundless sky changed. A myriad of bolts of lightning crisscrossed together while a myriad of rays of light bloomed in the sky. This miraculous scene caused Tuoba Nianchuan to be stunned speechless. When this phenomenon appeared, not only was Tuoba Nianchuan shocked, but even Tuoba Yuntian, who had just arrived in the outside world, turned pale. He clenched his fists tightly and shot away in a streak of light. Yi Xian's pair of eyes pierced through the void. Tuoba Yuntian's every move was under his surveillance. He'd revealed this celestial art in hopes that Tuoba Yuntian would realize his mistake and mend his ways. In front of Yi Xian, Yi Ling seemed to have turned into a young girl of the past. She looked at Yi Xian with eyes filled with worship. "Big brother, are you an immortal now?" Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't answer his little sister's question. Instead, he took a deep look at his little sister and said in a deep voice, "Little sister, go and bring the wooden puppet I gave you on your wedding day." "Ah. Oh, okay." Yi Ling hurriedly went into the house. When she returned, there was a wooden box in her hand. This was also the wedding gift Yi Xian gave her on her wedding day. When Yi Xian opened the wooden box, 2 wooden puppets appeared. When he held the wooden puppets in his hand, a light of understanding flashed across his eyes. Back then, before he left the human world, these 2 puppets contained 2 strands of supreme power, all for the sake of protecting Yi Ling and his mother. But now, the wooden puppets in his hand were only 2 pieces of rotten wood. The 2 supreme powers contained in them were long gone. "Big brother, this wooden puppet is a gift you gave me. Other than my husband and I've never shown it to anyone else," Yi Ling said softly. "Okay, put it away." Yi Xian put the wooden puppets back into the wooden box. A cold light flashed across his eyes. He'd finally confirmed one last thing. Tuoba Yuntian could become an immortal in the mortal world in less than 500 years because he'd absorbed and refined the 2 supreme powers in the wooden puppets. One had to know that when he'd made these 2 wooden puppets, he'd been at the great vehicle stage. His 2 supreme powers contained unimaginable power. Tuoba Yuntian had secretly refined these 2 supreme powers behind Yi Ling's back. Coupled with the recovery of the world's spirit qi, it wasn't strange that he'd become an immortal in 500 years. Chapter 326. If Tuoba Yuntian had only hidden the fact that he had refined 2 supreme powers from Yi Linger and passed the tribulation to become an immortal in these 500 years, Yi Xian wouldn't have thought too much about it. After all, becoming an immortal was the goal of every cultivator. However, when everything that had happened in the past 500 years was put together, a shocking truth surfaced. This also made Yi Xian come to a decision. "Brother, what are you thinking about?" Looking at Yi Xian's silence, Yi Ling asked curiously. Yi Xian turned his thoughts around and looked at his little sister seriously. He said in a low voice, "Ling, if one day you find out that your loved one has become your mortal enemy, what would you do?" Hearing Yi Xian's words, Yi Ling was startled. Her mind shook slightly and she said in a daze, "Brother, what are you talking about? Why can't I understand?" Looking at his little sister's confused face, Yi Xian nodded and didn't continue asking. Perhaps letting her never know the truth was the greatest happiness for her. "I still have some things to do, so I won't stay here any longer," Yi Xian said as he prepared to leave. This made Yi Ling's expression change. She said in a sad voice, "Brother, are you going to leave without saying goodbye again?" Yi Xian looked at his little sister deeply and sighed in his heart. After all, she was his only relative in the mortal world. It was just that the heavens were playing tricks on him. He couldn't let his little sister know what he was going to do next. Immortals and mortals are different. There is no end to the great Tao. Perhaps after this farewell, we will never meet again, Yi Xian muttered to himself. When he took a step forward, he disappeared from Yi Ling's sight. "Mother, why is uncle's words so strange?" Tuoba Nianchuan asked suspiciously. At this moment, Yi Ling sat in silence. Then she smiled bitterly and said, "This uncle of yours is not immortal. If I'm not wrong, he has already become one of the legendary immortals. You have to cultivate well in the future. If you can enter the immortal world, perhaps you can meet him again." Cultivation Alliance Headquarters, Vast Heaven Palace. Wu Juexian, Monk Yuan Su, the 3 team leaders, and many other cultivators were all standing in Vast Heaven Palace. "Are you telling the truth?" Monk Yuan Su's face was deathly pale. The others were even more terrified. They could not believe what Wu Juexian had told them. "Do you think I have the time to lie to you?" Wu Juexian's face flushed red. I've said it before. Back then, Mr. left after becoming an immortal. Even if we left the underworld, we must not make things difficult for Fatso Huang. Now that Mr. has returned to the human world, the only path left for us is death. One of the 3 team leaders of the Viper clan, who was now a Dharma protector of the Alliance of Cultivators, spoke in a vexed voice. In the past, Mr.'s cultivation was already unrivaled in the world. After 500 years, I'm afraid you've already become an immortal. Why don't we personally go and beg for forgiveness? Perhaps we can still obtain Mr.'s forgiveness, Mantis suggested. Are you kidding me? It's not like you don't know Mr.'s methods. Only death awaits traitors like us, Wu Qing rebuked coldly. Then what do you suggest we do? Are we just going to sit here and wait for death? Steamed Bun retorted coldly. All right, stop arguing, Monk Yuan Su growled. Then, he looked around at everyone present and said, whoever started the trouble should end it. Back then, the underworld was torn apart because of the Immortal Master. Everything we did was done according to his orders. Now that he has become an immortal in the human world, perhaps he's the only one who can stop Mr. Buzz. Immortal light rippled and the void rippled. As soon as Monk Yuan Su finished speaking, a person suddenly appeared in the main hall. This person was dressed in green and wore a golden mask on his face. No one could see his appearance clearly. Greetings, Immortal Master. As this person appeared, everyone was stunned at first, but they still cupped their hands and bowed. Immortal Master, back then, without waiting for Wu Juexian to speak, the mysterious Immortal Master waved his hand and interrupted, say no more. I already know that Yi Xian has returned. Hearing the Immortal Master's words, everyone was stunned. They did not expect him to already know this news. Immortal Master, even though you've already passed the tribulation and become an immortal, you must know that you were the one who annihilated the Yi family back then. Mr. Yi had already become an immortal 500 years ago. I'm afraid you're no match for him. That's right. We're all in the same boat. Even though the destruction of the underworld back then was caused by our internal strife, if it weren't for you adding fuel to the fire, why would we have betrayed the underworld? If we die, you won't be able to live either. Monk Yuan Su said coldly. Suddenly, the mysterious Immortal Master snorted coldly, now you're afraid. What were you guys doing when you betrayed the underworld back then? Wu Juexian, you piece of trash. I didn't force you back then. It was you who betrayed the underworld for the sake of my 3 mountain sea sweeping technique. And you, Monk Yuan Su. I remember that you were the first to betray the underworld, weren't you? Over the years, I've sent you so many women for you to pluck, allowing you to enjoy the blessings of the mortal world. Now you're biting me back. And you bastards. Over the past few hundred years, you've enjoyed all the glory, splendor, and wealth. The cultivation resources of the entire mortal world were all for you to squander. Just your concubines alone have reached hundreds, haven't they? The Immortal Master spoke with great familiarity. His voice was malicious and low, causing everyone's expressions to change slightly. However, they did not know how to refute him. In reality, all that was said was secondary. Wu Juexian and the others had betrayed the underworld for their own sake. They understood this in their hearts as well. However, Yi Xian's return had long caused their minds to be in chaos. Seeing that everyone was silent, the Immortal Master sneered, "You're all despicable villains. Stop pretending to be noble and virtuous. We haven't reached a dead end yet. Immortal Master, do you have any brilliant plans?" Monk Yuan Su lowered his posture and asked. "I've already met Yi Xian. His cultivation base is indeed unfathomable. Even I can't see through his cultivation base. However, according to my guess, after a mere 500 years, he's at most at the profound immortal realm. Although I'm no match for him alone, you must know that the Immortal Cultivation Alliance controls the entire mortal world. It's said that there are tens of millions of immortal cultivators. How can he be a match for us alone?" The Immortal Master sneered. "I don't agree." Suddenly, Mantu hurriedly said, "Mr. Yi has unfathomable means. We couldn't see through his cultivation base in the past. Who knows what realm he's at today after 500 years. We can't afford to take this risk." "Can't afford to take it?" The Immortal Master sneered disdainfully and said in a cold voice, "We have to take it even if we can't afford to. We're all in the same boat. Either Yi Xian dies or we die. There's no third option at all. Moreover, you're overestimating Yi Xian. You must know that 500 years ago, the world's spiritual energy had yet to recover. He walked the path of a blood cultivator. Naturally, he was incomparably powerful in your eyes. However, 500 years have passed since the world's spiritual energy recovered. I've already become an immortal. Moreover, my Immortal Cultivation Alliance has 5 great cultivators at the tribulation stage and 1,000 at the unification stage. Could it be that we're afraid of Yi Xian?" Chapter 327. What invincible? What divine King Yi Xian? He has already become history. Since he dares to return to the human world, the only outcome for him is death. The Immortal Master roared ferociously, and the immortal light around him became chaotic. From this, it could be seen that he hated Yi Xian greatly. Wu Juexian and the others did not know why the Immortal Master hated Yi Xian so much. It was as if he had a blood feud with Yi Xian. But no matter what, they were now grasshoppers on the same rope, and could only advance and retreat together. The Immortal Master is right. We are too afraid of Yi Xian. Not to mention that the Immortal Master has already become an immortal, with so many immortal cultivators in the Immortal Cultivation Alliance, we might not be afraid of Yi Xian, Monk Yuan Su growled ferociously. Pass down my orders. Announce to the world that the demon Yi Xian, who caused the dark turmoil 500 years ago, has reappeared. Gather all immortal cultivators in the body integration stage in the world to gather at the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. On the 7th day of the 7th month, prepare to slay the demon together, the Immortal Master said ferociously. There was only 1 month left until the 7th day of the 7th month. Obviously, this Immortal Master wanted to gather all the immortal cultivators in the world to have a battle of life and death with Yi Xian. The world was in chaos, and the world was in an uproar. When the Immortal Cultivation Alliance released a statement, it immediately caused a commotion among the people. This statement was very simple. It made up a history that did not exist. It told the world that 500 years ago, the human race was massacred by the blood-soul mutant beasts because of one person. And this person's name was Yi Xian. His original form was the demon from beyond the heavens. This time, he had reappeared to bring disaster to the world. The Immortal Cultivation Alliance gathered all the immortal cultivators in the world to slay the demon together and return peace to the world. But a lie was still a lie. Since the recovery of the world's spiritual energy, there were too many immortal cultivators who had lived for more than 500 years. Naturally, they were familiar with the truth from 500 years ago. The divine King Yi Xian was the person who started an era. 500 years ago, he spread martial arts throughout the world, and led the human race on the path of rapid evolution. But in the past few hundred years, under the pressure of the Immortal Cultivation Alliance, these immortal cultivators who knew the truth had remained hidden. But when the news of Yi Xian's return spread, these immortal cultivators who were alive from several hundred years ago stepped forward. Although the Martial Security Department of China had long since ceased to exist, the 4 team leaders were still alive in this world. They had even established cultivation families one after another. Now that they received news of Yi Xian's return, they announced the truth from 500 years ago to the world. Unfortunately, the Cultivation Alliance had already ruled the human world for hundreds of years. The people of the world didn't believe the truth announced by the 4 great cultivation families, and all sorts of cries for Yi Xian sounded out all over the world. Was. In a small, remote city in the east. A white-haired old man with an apron on his waist was selling buns with a smile on his face. He had a kind and amiable look on his face. "Old Zhang, take away 3 beef buns," a young man shouted. "Okay, take them." The old man was old. His hands were not as nimble as before. He slowly packed the breakfast and handed it to the young man. "Grandpa, you're old. Let me sell them." A young girl with a ponytail was wiping the table. She quickly ran over to help her grandpa sell the rest of the breakfast. "This is the Water City television station. We have urgent news. The demon Yi Xian has appeared again after 500 years. This demon is wreaking havoc in the human world." On the television, a female host was broadcasting the announcement made by the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. The people who were eating breakfast were listening attentively. "Sigh, it seems like our good days are about to come to an end." A young woman was eating breakfast, and she let out a sigh. "Everyone has the right to kill the demon. The Immortal Cultivation Alliance will definitely kill the demon. Let's wait and see." A middle-aged man said disdainfully. "Hey, old Zhang, what are you looking at? Let go of the breakfast." At this moment, the old man was staring blankly at the television. The breakfast that was packed was tightly held in his hand. No matter how the young man pulled, the breakfast was not taken out of the old man's hand. "Grandpa, what's wrong?" The young girl's expression changed slightly. She kept shaking the old man's arm. Her eyes were filled with anxiety. She was afraid that her grandpa was seriously ill. "Netherlord. Netherlord is back. Netherlord is back," the old man murmured. The breakfast in his hand fell to the ground. The next scene made the young girl and the people eating change their expressions. They could not believe their eyes. Buzz! The old man's turbid eyes were focused. A blood-red light quietly flashed across his eyes, and specks of spiritual light were born around him. His pale white hair fluttered in the absence of wind, and an extremely terrifying wave of energy rolled out in all directions with the old man as the center. "Zhang Xian, the personal guard of the death god of the underworld, welcomes Netherlord back to the human world." The voice shook the heavens and the earth. The old man's body, which was originally hunched, was now as straight as a pine tree. Under everyone's shocked gaze, the old man took a step forward. The earth shook violently. The sky was covered by a blood-red light. His entire body soared into the sky and turned into a stream of light that shot toward the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. "Grandpa! Grandpa!" the young girl murmured. She could not believe what she was seeing. Was this the grandfather she had always depended on? This is old Zhang." The young man collapsed to the ground. He was already stunned by this scene. In a bustling metropolis in the east. On the clean and tidy streets, there was an endless stream of young men and women. There were peddlers hawking on both sides of the street. There were also hovering airships crisscrossing in the void. An old beggar, who was emitting a foul smell, sat at the bottom of a building. In front of him was a broken bowl. He was constantly begging the passers-by. However, the passers-by covered their noses and hurriedly avoided him. Their eyes were full of disgust. "Damn it, you stinky beggar! Didn't Lao Tzu tell you not to beg here?" A security guard of the building walked out with a baton. His face was even more ferocious. He raised the baton and whipped it at the old beggar. Now broadcast urgent news. There is an extraterrestrial demon. On the screen of the building, the news was being broadcasted. Facing the beating of the security guards, the old beggar would have already begged for mercy if it was any other day. But today, he just stared at the screen in a daze and let the security guards beat him without begging for mercy. Li Badian, the personal guard of the death god of the underworld, welcomes the return of the lord of the underworld to the human world. Suddenly, a voice that could shatter mountains and rivers came from the old beggar's mouth. An unimaginably horrible and majestic blood aura filled the air. This also frightened the security guard who was whipping him. The baton in his hand had already fallen to the ground. Bang! The old beggar's palm and fingers blasted out. The old beggar slapped out casually and directly shattered the security guard into pieces. In the horrified eyes of the passers-by, the old beggar who had been begging all year round stepped into the sky and turned into a stream of light and disappeared. Chapter 328. When you stared into the abyss stared back at you. This was a bottomless abyss. It was like the mouth of an ancient beast, sending chills down one's spine. At the bottom of this abyss, there was a pool of blood. A middle-aged man was sitting cross-legged in the pool. A large number of beast skeletons could be seen everywhere. The blood-red spiritual light surrounded him, giving off an extremely eerie feeling. Master! Suddenly, a sword light flew over. As the light dissipated, a young man appeared at the edge of the pool of blood. He looked at the middle-aged man with a hint of excitement. Didn't I tell you that you are not allowed to come here to find me unless there is an important matter? 500 years had passed. Gu Beichen was no longer as young as before. There was a long and narrow scar on his face. When he opened and closed his eyes, they were even more eerie and cold. Master, take a look for yourself. The young man did not dare to delay. He immediately threw a jade slip at Gu Beichen. Gu Beichen caught it in his hand and sank his spiritual consciousness into the jade slip to read it. After a full 10 breaths, Gu Beichen suddenly opened his eyes. His body was trembling slightly, and the terrifying blood-red light around him was violently spewing out. Sir, you're back. Gu Beichen trembled as he muttered to himself. A mist appeared in his vicious eyes, turning into 2 drops of tears that flowed down his cheeks. The young man was Gu Beichen's disciple. In his memory, his master had always been cold. But today, he was actually crying. This made the young man extremely surprised. Disciple, let's go. Master, where are we going? The Immortal Cultivation Alliance. The master and disciple exchanged questions and answers. But when Gu Beichen rose from the pool of blood, a terrifying scene appeared. Gu Beichen's knees were cut off, and he floated out of the pool of blood. When he fought with Wu Juexian, his legs were cut off. For hundreds of years, he had been cultivating at the bottom of the abyss. He wanted to achieve great success in his cultivation and seek revenge on Wu Juexian and the others. Su Hang City, Landscape Manor. Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the void. There was no aura around him. Fatso Huang stood to the side, but his expression was extremely sinister. Master, Wu Juexian and the others are stubborn. They have gathered all the cultivators in the world to attack you. They deserve to die. Fatso Huang said coldly. Hearing Fatso Huang's words, Yi Xian's expression did not change. He was not angry. He looked into the distance and said calmly, they are just ants. Since they did not come to see me, I really want to see how much their cultivation has improved after 500 years. The 7th day of the 7th month was a very important day for the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. Ordinary cultivators only knew that today was the day of demon slaying. Not only were the 5 deputy leaders in the Immortal Cultivation Alliance but even the reclusive and mysterious Immortal Master would appear today. Just look at the boundless sky and the undulating mountains. Immortal cultivators came from all over the world. Multicolored lights flickered in the sky. They all gathered in the boundless mountains, making it impossible for people to see the end of it. Immortal Cultivation Alliance, Vast Sky Peak. A Tongtian golden flag fluttered in the wind. The golden flag had 2 words written on it, demon slaying. 5 tribulation passing stage cultivators stood on the vast sky peak, while 1,000 body integration stage cultivators stood on both sides. High up in the sky, the immortal master sat cross-legged in his imperial robe with 9 dragons. Faint immortal light radiated from his body. The 3 deputy leaders of the Immortal Cultivation Alliance were called Green Crow, Kai Feng, and Sung Long. These 3 were rising stars. They were also the confidants of the Immortal Master. Although Wu Juexian and Monk Yuan Su were also deputy leaders of the Immortal Cultivation Alliance, their positions were slightly lower than these 3. They had always been in conflict with these 3 people. However, today, all of their conflicts no longer existed. They were going to face a great enemy. Only by killing this great enemy could the Immortal Cultivation Alliance exist forever. 1 Heaven Immortal, 5 Tribulation Stage Cultivators, and thousands of Body Integration Stage Cultivators. This was the strongest force of the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. There were more than 1 million cultivators coming from all over the world. They were all here to slay demons. The cultivators that blotted out the sky and covered the earth were releasing rays of spiritual light that covered the world for millions of kilometers. The aura that shook the heavens and the earth was extremely shocking, causing the Immortal Master to firmly believe that even if Yi Xian was at the profound immortal realm, he would still fall at his hands. Yi Xian, you didn't expect this, did you? I've been planning for hundreds of years. I've already controlled all the cultivators in the world. If you dare to appear here today, I'll definitely kill you. The Immortal Master was wearing a golden mask. Although his expression couldn't be seen clearly, his words contained great resentment. Greetings, Immortal Master. A voice that shook the heavens and earth came from the boundless mountain. It was because the light emitted by the Immortal Master was immortal light that they had never seen before. This also proved that the Immortal Master had become an immortal. He was an existence that all cultivators looked up to. Everyone, please rise. The Immortal Master's voice was majestic. The immortal light around him shone brightly. 500 years ago, an otherworldly demon came to the world. He led millions of blood-soul beasts to slaughter the human race. Fortunately, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth recovered, allowing us to resist with all our might. In the end, we exterminated the blood-soul beasts and returned to the world in peace. However, the demon Yi Xian escaped the disaster and returned 500 years later. I carry the will of the heavens. As the master of the Immortal Cultivation Alliance, even if I have to die together with this demon, I will definitely kill him. I will never let the world fall into the dark turmoil of the past again. The Immortal Master's immortal light lingered around him. His voice echoed in the heavens and earth. Slay demons. Millions of cultivators shouted in unison. Everyone's face was filled with indignation. It was obvious that they had been bewitched by the Immortal Master's words. After all, they naturally believed the words of an immortal. Ha! What a joke! Back then, Mr. Yi spread martial prowess throughout the world and allowed humans to embark on the path of cultivation. Only then did he survive the slaughter of the blood-soul beasts. How did he become an unpardonable evil person in your mouth? Suddenly, a ray of blood-red light shot over from afar. Before he even arrived, his maniacal laughter could already be heard. This caused the Immortal Master to narrow his eyes as a cold, murderous intent silently flashed through his eyes. Gu Beichen. As the blood-red light dissipated, Gu Beichen also appeared on the great sky peak. This also caused Wu Juexian's expression to change slightly. He did not expect Gu Beichen to still be alive. Wu Juexian, back then, you betrayed the underworld and cut off my legs. Today, let's settle the grudge between us once and for all, Gu Beichen said coldly. Chapter 329. Early Stage Tribulation Passing Stage. Looking at the aura around Gu Beichen, Wu Juexian smiled disdainfully. I have to say, I'm really surprised that you can enter the tribulation passing stage in just a few hundred years. Unfortunately, you're still not my match. It was not that Wu Juexian was arrogant. He had already entered the mid-stage tribulation passing stage and was only one step away from entering the late-stage tribulation passing stage. How could Gu Beichen be his match? If Lord Gu Beichen is not your match, what if we join in? Suddenly, dozens of blood-red light streaked across the sky, each of them releasing an extremely violent aura. The rolling blood qi shattered the void, and dozens of old people appeared before Wu Juexian's eyes. Death God's Guard Li Batian. Death God's Guard Zhang Xian. Death God's Guard Mo Li. The 36 personal guards of the Death God were all personally nurtured by Yi Xian in the past. Today, 500 years later, the weakest among them had already stepped into the body fusion stage. Li Batian and Zhang Xian had even stepped into the early stage of the tribulation transcendence stage. And us. Tens of thousands of cultivators came across the sky. When the spiritual light dissipated, Qing Long Tianyu's figure was also revealed. However, 500 years had passed, and they were already a little old, no longer as strong as they were in the past. Ha! Monk Yuan Su stepped out, and the void collapsed inch by inch. He looked at Gu Beichen and the others with a ferocious expression. Just some small fries. If not for Yi Xian's return, you wouldn't have dared to come out. Since you're here today, I'll kill you all in one fell swoop. Old friends from the past, but when they met again, they were enemies. This was a kind of tragedy. However, Wu Juexian and the others were full of confidence now, because there were millions of cultivators gathered here, and there was also the Immortal Master, a celestial immortal. Even if Yi Xian really appeared here, they were confident that they could fight against Yi Xian. Kill. Without any nonsense, although Gu Beichen had lost his legs, his combat power was unparalleled. He took out a blood-red sword and directly slashed at Wu Juexian, killing him first. Brothers, before the Nether King arrives, it's time for us to get some exercise so that the Nether King won't personally kill these traitors. Zhang Xian was the old man who was selling buns. At this moment, he no longer had the slightest bit of benevolence on his face. A crimson saber pierced through the sky and charged directly at Monk Yuan Su. Even though his opponent was a realm higher than him, he did not take him seriously at all. Zhang Xian, a piece of trash like you dares to fight me? Have you forgotten that I was the one who taught you the Buddhist demonic arts back then? Monk Yuan Su growled. Bald donkey Yuan Su, Lao Tzu has been cultivating in the marketplace for 500 years. He has long transcended your dharma of Buddha and demon. This saber was personally prepared for you. Die for Lao Tzu. Reverse killing art. Zhang Xian's crimson saber tore through the sky, bringing with it a 10,000-foot-long saber light as it slashed down. This also caused Monk Yuan Su's expression to change drastically. He did not expect Zhang Xian's cultivation to be so terrifying after several hundred years. Come, come, come. Let your Grandpa Batian test your strength. Li Batian was the old man who spent his days begging. At this moment, he was in high spirits and even seemed a little deranged. The terrifying cultivation that he had hidden for several hundred years erupted as he charged towards the other tribulation passing stage cultivator of the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. Kill. Great Sky Peak was in complete chaos. The 36 Death God's bodyguards attacked violently, reenacting the glory of the Death God's bodyguards in the past. Azure Dragon Tianyu and the others even led tens of thousands of cultivators to hold the line for them. The void was exploding and the heavens and earth were shaking. A great battle of life and death had finally begun. The crisscrossing spiritual lights and spells shattered mountains and rivers. The furious roars exploded in the void, causing the cultivators who were watching this battle to look at each other in shock. From the beginning to the end, the Immortal Master watched coldly and had no intention of making a move. This was because he knew that these people were not worth his time. His true opponent was that legendary figure. He wanted to sublimate himself to fight with him and completely establish his reputation as the master of the world. Wu Juexian, Monk Yuan Su, and the other 3 team leaders were forced back by Gu Beichen and the 36 Death God's bodyguards. This caused the 5 of them to look ferocious. They did not expect Gu Beichen and the others' cultivation to increase so much in the past few hundred years. This caused their hearts to fill with murderous intent. What are you still looking at? Hurry up and attack! Wu Juexian roared at the 1,000-body synthesis stage cultivators. This caused the 1,000-body synthesis stage cultivators to rise into the air and surround the group of cultivators. Star formation of extinction. Under Wu Juexian's low roar, the 1,000-body integration stage immortal cultivators collectively formed hand seals, causing the heavens and earth to rumble and shake. Starlight filled the sky and interweaved into a starry net that covered the sky, directly suppressing Gu Beichen and the Death God's personal guard. A life and death crisis, an attack of death. Gu Beichen and the others turned pale. Even though their cultivation levels were high, there was no way they could defend themselves against 1,000 cultivators of the form synthesis stage. Moreover, Wu Juexian and the others were holding the fort. They could attack them at any time. Hee hee. Beichen, you're not dead yet. You're really lucky. Suddenly, a maniacal laugh came from the void. Fatso Huang's bloated figure appeared quietly in front of Gu Beichen. This caused Gu Beichen and the Death God's bodyguards to be overjoyed. Fatso Huang. Fatso Huang's appearance caused Wu Juexian and the others to exclaim in shock. This was because Wu Juexian and the others knew that Fatso Huang had always been by Yi Xian's side. His appearance here meant that Yi Xian was here. Kill them! Monk Yuan Su roared ferociously. Unfortunately, before the 1,000-body synthesis stage cultivators could attack, Fatso Huang smiled ferociously and shot out a ray of immortal light. Fire-blocking dome. Rumble. The heavenly fire burned the plains and the void collapsed. The fire-blocking dome expanded with the wind until it was 10,000 feet wide and covered Gu Beichen and the others. The terrifying heavenly fire spread through the void, causing the void to distort. Immortal. Immortal artifact. Wu Juexian screamed in horror. His face was pale to the extreme. Not only Wu Juexian, but even the Immortal Master, who was sitting cross-legged in the sky, narrowed his eyes. Wu Juexian, today is the day you die. Fatso Huang looked at Wu Juexian and the others as if they were already dead. His voice was extremely vicious. Yi Xian, since you're already here, why hide? The Immortal Master stood up in the sky and said in a low voice. What a joke. Why would a piece of trash like you need to hide? Look above your head. Fatso Huang sneered. The Immortal Master's expression changed slightly when he heard Fatty Huang's words. He abruptly raised his head and looked up. When a figure entered his field of vision, the Immortal Master fell into a daze. It took him quite a while to regain his senses. In the sky, there were dark clouds for thousands of miles. Yi Xian stood above the clouds with his hands behind his back. There was no immortal light around him and his face was calm. He was looking down at the people below him. Obviously, he had been here for a long time, but no one had noticed his presence. Chapter 330. At the same time, when Wu Juexian and the others saw Yi Xian in the sky, they completely turned into clay dolls. However, their bodies trembled unconsciously, and a feeling of fear spread around them. Although Wu Juexian and the others had already planned to fight to the death with Yi Xian, when they really saw Yi Xian in person, an indescribable fear filled their hearts. They were all Yi Xian's subordinates in the past, and they deeply understood how terrifying Yi Xian was. He killed the blood-soul exotic beasts, cut down the remnant souls of the immortal gods, and slaughtered all the sects in the world. He even had the courage to conquer the world and set mankind on the path of evolution. Although Yi Xian had only stayed in the human realm for 10 years, no one in the entire human realm was his match. Any enemy who stood in his way would only end up dead. There had never been an exception. Today, after 500 years, Yi Xian appeared in front of them again. This also evoked the memories hidden deep in the minds of Wu Juexian and the others. The silent fear made them feel as if they could not breathe. Juexian, greets Mr. Yi. Wu Juexian bowed to Yi Xian, and his voice was trembling. Yuan Su greets Mr. Yi. Underling, greets the Nether Lord. Wu Juexian was not the only one bowing. Monk Yuan Su and the 3 team leaders also unconsciously bowed to Yi Xian. However, when they suddenly woke up, they realized that something was wrong. However, they did not get up. A trace of bitterness flashed through their eyes. At this moment, they finally understood that from the beginning to the end, their so-called fight to the death was just a joke. Such a scene also shocked the millions of cultivators who were watching. Wu Juexian and the others were clearly important figures in the cultivation alliance. Why were they so afraid of one person? Who was this Yi Xian? This question arose in everyone's heart, but no one answered them. Kneel. In the sky, Yi Xian calmly spoke. Although he didn't reveal the slightest bit of his aura, when Wu Juexian and the others heard it, their faces turned pale. Under the gazes of tens of thousands of people, their knees went soft, and they actually knelt down. Hua! A single stone caused 1,000 ripples as all sorts of clamorous discussions sounded out. No one would have thought that just a single sentence from Yi Xian would cause Wu Juexian and the others to kneel down. At this moment, the Immortal Master narrowed his eyes and clenched his fists tightly. His eyes were filled with a strong sense of brutality as he looked at Wu Juexian and the others. 500 years. It had been 500 years. Even though he had subdued Wu Juexian and the others and allowed them to enjoy the riches of the world, they had never once bowed to him. Now, just one sentence from Yi Xian was enough to make them kneel. They didn't even have the courage to fight Yi Xian. How could the Immortal Master not be furious? You bunch of trash. He is just one person. What are you afraid of? There are millions of cultivators here, and I am a sky immortal. Killing him will be as easy as flipping my hand. The Immortal Master was completely enraged as he roared at Wu Juexian and the others. This made them feel ashamed, and they wanted to stand up and fight Yi Xian to the death. Unfortunately, when Wu Juexian raised his head and looked into Yi Xian's eyes, the fighting spirit in his heart collapsed. His eyes were filled with despair. The 6 desires are emotionless, and the heavens and earth have no heart. Wu Juexian, you should know the consequences of betraying me. Since you have served me in the past, you will end your own lives here. Yi Xian stepped down from the sky and slowly walked before Wu Juexian and the others. The way he looked at them was cold and emotionless. End our own lives here. Wu Juexian murmured bitterly. He really wanted to fight Yi Xian to the death, but for some reason, there seemed to be a voice in his head telling him that he might still have a chance to reincarnate if he ended his own life here. If he really attacked Yi Xian, his soul would be destroyed and he would die. Wu Juexian wasn't the only one who felt this way. Monk Yuan Su and the others felt the same way. However, they were extremely unwilling to end their own lives here. Sir, you can't let them off so easily. These traitors should be put to death by 1,000 cuts, then their primordial spirits are crushed so that they can never be reincarnated. Fatso Huang surged forward and said in a venomous voice. Sir, Wu Juexian broke my legs. I must avenge this myself. Gu Beichen said hatefully. Ha! All of a sudden, immortal light that blotted out the sky rippled out as the Immortal Master laughed sinisterly. His gaze towards Yi Xian was filled with resentment. Yi Xian, 500 years ago, you were invincible. However, 500 years later, today is my era. Do you really think that you can leave the infinite boundless mountain alive? Everyone, the time to kill the devil is now. Everyone, let's kill him together. The immortal master formed an immortal spell. The immortal light turned into a sword that slashed the heavens and attacked Yi Xian. 1,000-body integration stage immortal cultivators activated the formation and gathered all their power in one place. They also attacked Yi Xian. While the million immortal cultivators did not have any formation techniques, as the saying goes, enough ants can bite an elephant to death. As each and every one of them formed hand seals, unleashing their strongest techniques, the entire infinite boundless mountain shook violently within this million-kilometer radius. Yi Xian, go to hell. At the same time, Wu Juexian, Monk Yuan Su, and the others finally attacked. Although they were terrified of Yi Xian, they had to fight with all their might in the face of death. Sir, be careful. Fatso Huang's expression changed and he warned loudly. At this moment, Yi Xian's expression was calm. He didn't reveal any aura around him. Facing the overwhelming attacks, he didn't move at all. It was as if he didn't care about these attacks at all. Freeze. A simple word came out of Yi Xian's mouth. There was no immortal light covering the sky, nor was there any aura. It was just that the world suddenly stopped, as if time and space had stopped moving at this moment. An extremely strange and terrifying scene appeared. The overwhelming number of immortal cultivators were frozen in the void. Even the immortal master in the heavenly immortal realm was no exception. The wind stopped, the clouds were still, and even the vegetation in the infinite boundless mountain stopped swaying. It was as if this moment had been frozen into an eternal picture. My words are the law, and my actions are the law. This is the power of law, and also the power of heaven and earth. Yi Xian didn't even use the all-heaven immortal light. It was enough for him to control the laws of heaven and earth. Heaven and earth were silent. Everything was silent. Yi Xian strolled in the void. With a wave of his hand, the all-heaven immortal light whizzed out. It directly turned thousands of immortal cultivators into a bloody mist that filled the sky. All of them collapsed between heaven and earth. The heavenly Tao is merciless. It sees all living things as dogs. The Tao is merciless. It buries the souls of the dead in all ages. The human Tao is merciless. It can kill in the human world. Yi Xian strolled in the bloody mist. His face was expressionless. All living things were nothing but ants in his eyes. He could kill them with his fingers. Chapter 331. My words are the law, my actions are the law. All things in the world, reincarnation and rebirth, all are within my control. The chanting of sutras rumbled in the void. The world shook and space distorted. Something extremely terrifying happened. The boundless mountains within 1,000,000 miles became extremely illusory and collapsed inch by inch in silence. The million cultivators who were frozen in the void collapsed like sand. When a gust of wind blew, their bodies turned into a bloody mist that drifted between the heavens and the earth. A downpour of blood rained down from 1,000,000 miles high. However, it could not wet Yi Xian's clothes at all. The downpour of blood caused the land within 1,000,000 miles to converge into a long river of blood. The thick smell of blood wafted between the heavens and the earth. Reincarnation with a single thought, the destruction of all things. This was Yi Xian's method. There was no such thing as pity, nor was there any such thing as mercy. Regardless of whether these million cultivators were deceived by the immortal master or how innocent they were, anyone who went against him, Yi Xian, would only end up dead. There had never been an exception to this. If these people wanted to blame someone, they could only blame their own stupidity. They actually listened to the immortal master's words and attacked him. Since they dared to attack him, they should be prepared to die. Buzz! Yi Xian's palm brushed through the air, and the world returned to normal. However, a silent fear spread out at this moment. The faces of Wu Juexian and the others were already pale. If Fatty Huang and the others had not imprisoned them in the void, they would have fallen down from the sky. The Immortal Master's body was trembling. The immortal light around him had long been destroyed. He looked at Yi Xian with a deep sense of despair. He finally understood what kind of terrifying existence he was facing. "You, what is your cultivation level?" The Immortal Master's voice trembled as he muttered. "Overarching Heaven Xian Immortal." These 4 simple words came out of Yi Xian's mouth. However, in the Immortal Master's ears, it was no less than a bolt from the heavens. This caused him to be in a daze. He did not recover for a full 10 breaths. Overarching Heaven Xian Immortal. The Celestial Master trembled as he murmured. Then, he suddenly looked at Yi Xian and roared hysterically, "Impossible, impossible, a mere 500 years, a mere 500 years, how could you have stepped into the overarching Heaven Xian celestial realm?" It was no wonder that the Immortal Master was so crazy. After all, the difference between the Heavenly Immortal stage and the overarching Heaven Xian Immortal stage was like heaven and earth. Celestial Immortal, Mystic Immortal, Golden Immortal, True Immortal, Primordial Unity Mystic Immortal, Primordial Unity Golden Immortal, and all the way to All Heaven Mystic Immortal. Not to mention that the Immortal Master was only at the Heavenly Immortal realm. Even if the Grand Unity Golden Immortal was here, Yi Xian would be able to kill him with a single finger, let alone a mere Heavenly Immortal like him. One had to know that in the Earth Immortal realm, even a Heavenly Soldier had the cultivation of a Heavenly Immortal. Yi Xian was the Emperor of the East Pole. How could he place such an ant-like figure in his eyes? "Sir, we are willing to end our lives here. We hope that you will give us a chance to be reincarnated for the sake of our past relationship." Wu Juexian and the others trembled as they kowtowed. Their faces had already turned pale. If there was a medicine for regret in this world, they would never have chosen to betray Yi Xian. Unfortunately, Wu Juexian and the others no longer had the chance. "Fatso Huang, I'll leave them to you." Yi Xian pointed his finger at Wu Juexian and the others, directly sealing their cultivation. This also caused Wu Juexian and the others' expressions to change drastically. They knew very well how vicious Fatso Huang was. They were afraid that they would suffer a fate worse than death if they fell into his hands. "Yes, sir." Fatso Huang and Gu Beichen came over with hideous smiles and directly grabbed Wu Juexian and the others. Obviously, the grudge between them that had lasted for hundreds of years would come to an end today. There would be an end to it. Dark Lord. The 36 Death Guards' eyes were filled with hot tears as they all bowed to Yi Xian. This also made Yi Xian nod and say, "I've made you suffer these past hundreds of years. Follow Fatso Huang back to Suhang City." "Yes, Dark Lord." The 36 Death Guards bowed. To be able to receive a compliment from Yi Xian, they felt satisfied after enduring for hundreds of years. Qing Long Tianyu had not seen Yi Xian for hundreds of years. Now that he saw Yi Xian again, he was abnormally excited. His people looked at Yi Xian with great respect because the horrifying scene just now had really made their souls leave their bodies. They finally understood why the clan leader had come to help Yi Xian, even if it meant going against the Cultivation Alliance. Yi Xian simply chatted with the two of them for a while, then let them take their people and leave. This was because he really did not want Fatso Huang and the others to know what was going to happen next. After all, this was his family's business. When Fatso Huang and the others left with Wu Juexian and the others, only Yi Xian and the Divine Master were left in the void. However, the Divine Master had been in a state of madness from beginning to end and had not recovered even after a long time. "Should I call you Immortal Master or brother-in-law?" Yi Xian had his hands behind his back as he spoke in a calm voice. "Ha ha 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 ha." Suddenly, the Divine Master laughed mournfully. He snapped out of his madness and slowly took off his golden mask. A handsome face appeared before Yi Xian's eyes. It was Yi Ling-er's husband, Tuoba Luyun. Yi Xian, so you've already guessed it was me? Tuoba Luyun bitterly smiled mournfully. Seeing Tuoba Luyun's bitter expression, Yi Xian calmly said, "Originally, I didn't know you were the master of the Alliance of Cultivators. However, you revealed too many flaws, so I found out." Tuoba Luyun had already reached a dead end. He no longer cared about life and death as he loudly asked Yi Xian, "What flaws?" Firstly, back then, the Alliance of Cultivators destroyed the Yi family, yet they let Ling-er's mother and mine go. This is a very suspicious point. Secondly, when I went to see Ling-er, although you tried your best to hide your presence, I could tell with a glance that you had already become a celestial. Thirdly, those who are familiar with me all know that Yi Ling-er and my mother are my closest relatives in the mortal world. Why didn't the Alliance of Cultivators find the Tuoba family? When these 3 points are linked together, it is not difficult to guess that you are the master of the Alliance of Cultivators. However, there is one thing that I still don't understand. Why did you do this? What benefits does it bring you? Hearing Yi Xian's words, Tuoba Luyun kept smiling. However, his smile was mournful and sad. His gaze toward Yi Xian contained a hint of jealousy and anger. "Yi Xian, I must say that you are very smart. However, I will not tell you the reason why I did this," Tuoba Luyun said in a low voice. Hearing Tuoba Luyun's words, Yi Xian did not show any anger. He only calmly said, "I also don't want to know the reason why you did this. Because no matter what your goal is, it is not worth mentioning to me. Your final outcome can only be death. You want to kill me?" Tuoba Luyun sneered. "Why not?" Yi Xian's reply was light and indifferent, without a single ripple. Tuoba Yuntian seemed to be venting his anger. He had completely sunk into a paranoid mood. His voice echoed in the courtyard. At this moment, Yi Ling-er was scared silly by Tuoba Yuntian's appearance. She had never imagined that her husband would have so many paranoid thoughts. Yi Xian stood in the air. He was already regretting letting Tuoba Yuntian bid farewell to Yi Ling-er. However, he couldn't appear in front of his little sister. He could only look at Tuoba Yuntian with a gloomy killing intent. "Father, did uncle make you angry?" Tuoba Nianchuan asked carefully. "Uncle? Nianchuan, let me ask you. If your uncle wants to kill me, will you avenge me?" Tuoba Yuntian asked sinisterly. Looking at his father's distorted face, Tuoba Nianchuan was afraid. He muttered, "Why would uncle want to kill father?" "Father, what's wrong with you?" "Father is asking you another question," said Tuoba Yuntian. "I will. No matter who wants to kill father, Nianchuan will not let them off," said Tuoba Nianchuan solemnly. Good, good, good. As expected of my son, Tuoba Yuntian." Tuoba Yuntian laughed loudly. It was as if he was comforted by his son. Chapter 333. Yuntian, what's wrong with you? Did something happen between you and Big Brother? Yi Ling-er frowned. Conflict? Tuoba Yuntian looked up at Yi Xian and said, "Since the day we got married, there has been an irreconcilable conflict between us. Today, your big brother wants to kill me. Ling-er, do you think there's any conflict between us? Big brother wants to kill you." Yi Ling-er murmured to herself. Then she shouted, "That's impossible. Why would Big Brother want to kill you? Yi Xian, come out. Kill me in front of Ling-er if you can." Suddenly, Tuoba Yuntian roared to the sky. His face was twisted. Obviously, he had planned this all along. He came back to see Yi Ling-er to fight for a chance to live. Tuoba Yuntian knew that Yi Ling-er was Yi Xian's only family in this world. If there was anyone who could change Yi Xian's mind, it would be Yi Ling. High in the sky, in the void, Yi Xian's aura was gloomy and cold. He clenched his fists tightly. It was as if he was going to crush the void in his hands. However, he still walked down step by step until he appeared in front of Yi Ling. Big brother. Looking at Yi Xian, Yi Ling's face was pale. Looking at her husband's ferocious face, a bad feeling rose in her heart. What is going on? Yi Ling bit her lips and said. Yi Xian, Ling and Nianchuan are here now. Don't you want to kill me? Do it. Ha! Tuoba Yuntian laughed crazily as if he had gone mad. His laughter was ear-piercing. Tuoba Yuntian, I gave you a chance. You didn't know how to cherish it. Do you really think I don't dare to kill you in front of Ling? Yi Xian walked slowly. He was infuriated by this ant. A ray of all-heaven celestial light condensed in his palm, causing the wind and clouds to change. Tens of thousands of lightning bolts exploded in the sky. Wang! When Yi Xian raised his palm, even the space around him started to crack. It was as though he was going to kill Tuoba Yuntian on the spot in the next moment. Big brother! Suddenly, without waiting for Yi Xian to make a move, Yi Ling stood in front of Tuoba Yuntian and looked at Yi Xian with tears in her eyes. Ling, move aside. Yi Xian said coldly. His black pupils gradually turned white, and his aura gradually became cold-blooded and emotionless. Taisheng Wangqing, the great Tongtian. In Yi Xian's rules, no one could change anything he set, not even his closest relatives. If he didn't have a heart that was as firm as a rock, he would have died several times on the long path of cultivation. Regardless of whether it was for Mother Yi or for the destruction of the underworld, Yi Xian wanted a clear Dao heart. Killing Tuoba Yuntian was imperative. Yi Ling knelt on the ground with tears in her eyes. She begged Yi Xian, Big brother, what happened? Why do you want to kill him? Tuoba Nianchuan stood in front of his father and looked at Yi Xian with hostility. Uncle, why do you want to kill father? Why do I want to kill him? Yi Xian said in a low voice. He then looked at Tuoba Yuntian and said coldly, you will have to ask him about that. Yuntian, what did you do to make big brother so angry? Hurry up and kneel down and apologize to him. Yi Ling grabbed Tuoba Yuntian's clothes tightly and cried anxiously. Kneel down and apologize to him. Tuoba Yuntian smiled sadly. When he opened and closed his eyes, they were filled with madness. He suddenly shook off Yi Ling's hand and roared, Ling, don't you want to know why he wants to kill me? Today, I will tell you everything. Tuoba Yuntian seemed to have sunk into madness. He directly told her everything that had happened in the past 500 years. This made Yi Ling completely speechless. She looked at Tuoba Yuntian with an expression of extreme grief and anger. Why? Why did you do this? You killed second brother and his wife, destroyed the underworld, and even caused my mother to die of depression. Why did you do this? Yi Ling suddenly stood up. She grabbed Tuoba Yuntian's collar and shook him with all her strength. Tears flowed out of her eyes uncontrollably. Why did I do this? Don't you know? Tuoba Yuntian held Yi Ling's shoulders tightly. His voice was filled with unwillingness and sadness. From the day you and I got married, do you know how much pressure I had to bear? Everyone said that I, Tuoba Yuntian, was trying to climb up the social ladder because you, Yi Ling, had an invincible big brother. His name was Yi Xian. No matter where I went, everyone who saw me treated me with respect on the surface. But do you know what they said about me behind my back? They called me a gigolo, a good-for-nothing who lived off a woman, a piece of trash who relied on women. Tuoba Yuntian's face was extremely distorted. It was as if he had sunk into an extremely painful memory. This made Yi Ling listen to him in a daze. Her body was silently trembling. You, Yi Ling, my first wife, I endured the ridicule of others. Every day, I had to hear you talk about your big brother. How outstanding he was, how great he was. Do you know how I felt? Do you know? Tuoba Yuntian seemed to be venting his anger for many years. He was crazily questioning Yi Ling. I, Tuoba Yuntian, once swore to the heavens that as long as I lived, I would surpass Yi Xian. I would let you see your husband, Nian Xian's father. I would not be any worse than Yi Xian. I annihilated the Yi family. I want Yi Xian to die. I want to destroy the underworld. I want his foundation to disappear without a trace. I want to erase the history of his existence. I want to portray him as an outer demon, and I want him to be infamous for 10,000 years. I refined the two supreme powers he left behind. In 500 years, I became an immortal. All of this was to surpass him. I wanted to let you, Yi Ling, know that your husband would not be any worse than Yi Xian. Tuoba Yuntian laughed crazily. He laughed and laughed until tears flowed out. Then, he knelt in front of Yi Ling, and slammed his fists on the ground. Traces of blood flowed out from his fists as if he could not feel any pain. I gathered 1,000,000 immortal cultivators. I thought I could kill him in one fell swoop. Finally, I would not have to wake up from nightmares every day. However, the cruel reality told me that my years of hard work were nothing but a pile of bubbles. Overarching heaven Xian immortal. Ha ha ha. What's the use of me becoming an immortal? The human world could not even withstand a single blow from him. Tuoba Luyun seemed to be crying and laughing. It was as if he had sunk into madness. At this moment, Yi Ling slowly closed her eyes. She had bitten her lips until they bled. Silent tears flowed out. When Yi Ling opened her eyes again, she murmured, Yuntian, I want to ask you. Have you ever liked me? Chapter 334. I like you, I really like you. But in front of you, I feel inferior. I feel like I will never be good enough for you. Tuoba Yuntian's face was covered in tears, and his voice was extremely bitter. Hearing Tuoba Yuntian's words, a blissful smile appeared on Yi Linger's face. She slowly squatted down and hugged Tuoba Yuntian. You killed second brother and his wife, destroyed big brother's underworld, and even caused mother to die of depression. If big brother wants to kill you today, Linger does not have the face to stop him. But you and I are husband and wife. How can I bear to see big brother kill you personally? Pooh! Suddenly, a spiritual dagger appeared in Yi Linger's hand. She slowly pierced the spiritual dagger into Tuoba Yuntian's heart. Tuoba Yuntian did not use his immortal light to block it. He just looked at Yi Linger with a relieved expression. Traces of blood flowed out from Tuoba Yuntian's mouth. He caressed Yi Linger's face and murmured, to be able to die in your hands. I have no regrets. The spiritual dagger was slowly pulled out from Tuoba Yuntian's chest. Hot blood sprayed onto Yi Linger's face, and a relieved smile appeared on her face. Husband, you and I were husband and wife. It is Linger's fault that you became like this today. Even if you go to hell, Linger will accompany you by your side. Pooh! Yi Linger stabbed the spiritual dagger into her own heart. She leaned her head into Tuoba Yuntian's embrace. Blood flowed out from her mouth, and her life force was quickly fading away. Little sister. Yi Xian's expression changed. He was about to shoot out a ray of immortal light. An immortal pill appeared in his hand, and he was about to feed it to Yi Linger. Big brother. Don't save me. Before Yi Xian could do anything, Yi Linger stopped him with a trembling voice. Yuntian made a big mistake. His death is not regrettable. But everything he did was for me. Let me go to hell with him. I hope we can be a normal couple in the next life. Linger, I'm sorry. Tears blurred Tuoba Yuntian's eyes as he hugged his wife tightly. In his final moments, he said his final words. Then, with a smile of relief and happiness on his face, he lost his last breath. Looking at the scene before him, Yi Xian clenched his fists. The immortal light around him was extremely chaotic. This was really not the result he wanted, but he was powerless to change anything. Father, mother. Suddenly, Tuoba Nianshuan let out a wail and knelt down in front of Yiling. He tightly grasped her hands, tears smearing his face. Nianshuan. Don't hate your uncle. It's your father's fault. Yiling said weakly. She gradually lost her last breath and would never wake up. Father, mother, don't die. Tuoba Nianshuan continued to shake his parents' corpses. However, he was unable to wake them up. Tears continued to flow from his eyes, and his wails echoed throughout the courtyard. You can be their son in the next life. A speck of immortal light shot out. Yi Xian's face was filled with grief as it pierced through Tuoba Nianshuan's heart. Blood spurted out and dyed the sky red. Tuoba Nianshuan's corpse fell in front of his parents. Ha! Yi Xian suddenly laughed. He stared at the corpses of the family of three and seemed to have sunk into a state of madness. He was paranoid and silent. Dead. They're all dead. This is good too. I, Yi Xian, no longer have half a family in this mediocre mortal world. From now on, anyone who stands in my way will be exterminated. Not a single one will be left alive. A line of clear tears slowly flowed out of Yi Xian's eyes. The silent tears wet his eyes and flowed down his cheeks into his mouth. How long has it been since I cried? Yi Xian licked the tears in his mouth. His voice was mournful and murmured, so, tears are salty. Yama hell, open. All heaven immortal light rippled out. Yi Xian roared at the sky. The gates to Yama hell that hadn't been opened for 500 years opened in the mortal world. Yi Xian's voice also spread throughout the entire Yama hell. Where is the dark crow? Yama. Yama King. Your subordinate is here. A panicked and shocked voice came. Obviously, the dark crow had not seen Yi Xian for 500 years. He had thought that Yi Xian had gone to the earth immortal realm. He didn't expect that he would open the gates to Yama hell again. Yi Xian said to himself blankly, Yi Ling, Tuoba Yuntian, let the two of them become husband and wife in their next life. Let Tuoba Nianshuan become their son again. You will personally send them to reincarnate and let them be rich mortals in their next life. As you command, Yama King. The dark crow didn't dare to delay and hurriedly said respectfully. Buzz. Immortal light sprinkled down and the gates to Yama hell closed. Yi Xian looked around blankly and fell into a perplexed state. He didn't know if what he did was right or wrong. His only family was dead. He had no family left in this world. Was this the Tongtian immortal path he wanted? Yi Xian was at a loss. Searching his heart, he couldn't find the answer he wanted. Looking at the sky without speaking, hearing the earth move without being alarmed. Yi Xian's eyes were deep, and the immortal light around him undulated slightly. Yi Ling's death was a huge blow to him, because she was his last family in the mortal world. Yi Xian was at a loss, and he was also very hesitant. He felt that he had lost something very important. He searched hard in his heart, but he still could not find what he had lost. Was it family? Benevolence? Or was it the 7 emotions and 6 desires of a person? Yi Xian asked himself, but these were not what he was missing, because he had never lost these things. If he had lost his family, he would not have been sad about his little sister's death. If he did not have a trace of kindness, he would not have spread martial arts to the world, leaving behind a spark of hope for mankind. The so-called 7 emotions and 6 desires also existed in his body, but they were suppressed by his rock-solid Tao heart. Because he wanted to ascend to the 9 heavens, he could not be blinded by the 7 emotions and 6 desires. The heavens are not fair, and the people are the most holy. Let me go back to the homeland that gave birth to me, and see what I have lost. Thunder rumbled in all directions, and Yi Xian's voice echoed in the valley. When the black clouds that covered the sky rose under his feet, they also carried his body and disappeared from Buried Heart Valley. The autumn wind was bleak, and the withered leaves fell. Following Yi Xian's departure, the bulging grave stood in the autumn wind, as if it also buried Yi Xian's last thoughts. The world was in an uproar, and there were many discussions. When the Immortal Cultivation Alliance that had ruled the mortal world for hundreds of years was destroyed, the entire mortal world became somewhat turbulent. Yi Xian used his own strength to kill millions of cultivators in the world. The so-called Immortal Cultivation Alliance could not withstand a single blow from him, and it collapsed. When this news spread to the ears of the people, they were all terrified. They were deeply afraid that this demon from beyond the heavens would start a dark upheaval, and once again cause the human world to suffer an unprecedented calamity. However, the so-called calamity did not happen, and the world continued to operate normally. The sun rose from the east and set in the west, and Yi Xian's figure did not appear anywhere in the world. As time passed, the 4 great immortal cultivation clans led by the Azure Dragon clan began to restore the truth of history, and directly published the history books of 500 years ago to the world. Only then did the world know what kind of existence Yi Xian was 500 years ago. When the truth of history was announced to the public, many cultivators who had lived for 500 years cleared Yi Xian's name, and this also caused the world to wake up, and they also cursed the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. The name of the divine King Yi Xian was once again known by the world. Unfortunately, the world did not know that Yi Xian had never put these false names in his eyes. No matter if the world hated or respected him, it would not cause any ripples in his heart. 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. When the world was waiting for Yi Xian's reappearance, and when Fatso Huang and the others were looking for Yi Xian everywhere, Yi Xian seemed to have disappeared from the world, and no one saw him again. He walked through the mountains and rivers, crossed the desolate desert, and crossed the ocean on a small boat. Yi Xian's footprints were left in the green mountains and clear waters, and Yi Xian stayed on the first peak of the human world for a year. During these 3 years, Yi Xian walked through his homeland in the human world, but he still did not find what he had lost. In the spring of the 4th year, Yi Xian practiced medicine to save people. He showed his kind side, and became a doctor, and saved countless people with terminal illnesses. Unfortunately, during this year, Yi Xian still did not find the answer he wanted. In the 5th year, Yi Xian hated evil, and became an ordinary immortal cultivator. He wiped out the injustice in the human world, killed thousands of evil people, and saved people from disaster. In the 6th year, Yi Xian committed all kinds of evil, burning, killing, robbing, and massacring thousands of miles, but in the end, he still did not find the answer he wanted. In the 7th year, Yi Xian did not walk in the human world. He sat cross-legged in the sky, and questioned his Tao heart, but he still did not find anything. In the 8th year, Yi Xian was in a state of madness, and the laws of heaven and earth invaded his body. He hoped to understand his heart between life and death. Unfortunately, he was invincible in the human world, and the laws of heaven and earth could not hurt him. In the 9th year, Yi Xian sat in the clouds, watching the sun rise and the moon set. He felt the path of the great Tao of heaven and earth, but in the end, he did not find anything. In the winter of the 10th year, the wind and snow that filled the sky danced endlessly between heaven and earth. The cold wind was like a ferocious beast roaring ferociously. Yi Xian walked alone in the world of ice and snow. He didn't have a goal or direction and just silently walked forward. However, Clear Sky Town was just an ordinary human town. Because Green Sky Town was located in a highland area, it was as if it was connected to the sky. In the entire divine land, it was actually not very eye-catching. Being inconspicuous had its benefits. Clear Sky Town was located in a highland on the northern border. Most of the year, it was the season of winter snow. Because there were no famous mountains or great lakes within a radius of 10,000 miles, there were only a few immortal sections. It was a rare and quiet place. It also allowed mortals to avoid many disturbances and pass their days peacefully in Clear Sky Town. There were no floating airships or high-tech skyscrapers. This ancient town had existed in the Great Land for thousands of years. They worked from sunrise to sunset and were self-sufficient, maintaining a kind of ancient living custom. Translator, Nyoebo Studio Editor, Nyoebo Studio. The cold wind whistled and the heavy snow fell. The entire Clear Sky Town was covered in snow. At first glance, it looked like it was wrapped in silver. It gave people a feeling that it was spotless. Although the snowy scenery was beautiful, Clear Sky Town was a place of bitter cold. For mortals, it was already a great joy to be able to boil a pot of hot knife in front of their stove, get half a caddy of spiced beef, and drink a mouthful of strong wine with 2 or 3 friends. There were very few people on the streets. The snow on the ground was a foot high. If one wanted to walk in this heavy snow, it would take a lot of effort. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Heavy footsteps stepped on the snow, making the sound of snow being squeezed. At the end of the street, there was a middle-aged man. His face was plain and simple. He wore a thick leather jacket. He carried a 7 or 8-year-old child in his arms and walked with difficulty in the heavy snow. The child held a string of sugar figurines in his hand. His cheeks were red from the cold. However, in his father's arms, he did not feel cold. He even laughed cheerfully from time to time, proving the child's innocence and yearning for beautiful things. "Father, look." Suddenly, the smile on the child's face disappeared. He let out a cry of surprise and pointed at a roof in front of him. This shocked the middle-aged man, and he quickly looked in the direction the child was pointing at. The scene that entered his eyes made the middle-aged man sigh. A black-clothed youth was leaning against the broken roof. His clothes were extremely thin and his entire body seemed to be completely frozen. His skinny body was unconsciously trembling. His lips had completely lost their color and were stained with some ice shards. Clearly, it would not be long before he would freeze to death in this snowy and cold weather. Sigh, this person doesn't look like someone from the town. Where did he come from? The middle-aged man shook his head helplessly. "Father, let's save this big brother." The child kept shaking his father's arm. There was a trace of mist in his eyes. This also proved that the child's nature was pure. He could not bear to see the black-clothed young man freeze to death in the heavy snow on the street. The middle-aged man frowned. His voice was slightly hesitant as he said, "Han Er, our family doesn't have much food left. We don't know how long this heavy snow will last. This person's identity is unknown. If we bring him home, I'm afraid." When the middle-aged man spoke to this point, he hesitated. Obviously, he was just an ordinary father. It was already not easy for him to feed a family of 3. If he brought this black-clothed young man home, not to mention the black-clothed young man needing medical treatment, just the extra food for one more person would be a great burden to him. "Father, didn't you say to Han Er that saving a life is better than building a 7-storied pagoda? Since we've seen him, how can we let this big brother freeze to death in this world of ice and snow?" The child's voice was young as he kept begging his father. When he heard the child's words, the middle-aged man frowned. After a few breaths of time, his brows relaxed. He grinned and said, "Han Er is right. Since we've seen him, how can we not save him?" As the father and son spoke, they quickly arrived before the black-clothed young man. The child fell from his father's arms and took 2 or 3 steps to arrive before the young man. "Big brother, you must not fall asleep. Father said that if a person falls asleep in an extremely cold situation, he will never wake up." The child kept shaking the young man's arm. His young voice was slightly anxious. Unfortunately, the black-clothed young man's body had already been frozen stiff. He had fallen into a coma, so he did not have the slightest reaction to the child's words. If it were not for the young man's body trembling from time to time, the father and son would probably think that the young man before them had already frozen to death in the cold snow. Chapter 337. Little brother, this is my homemade liquor. Drink it to warm your body. I'll take you home for treatment. The middle-aged man took out a goatskin wineskin from his waist, pulled out the cork, and poured a large amount of strong liquor into the young man's mouth. The black-clothed young man coughed violently, but his pale face regained some color at this moment. The middle-aged man carried the young man on his back and held the child in his arms again. Braving the cold wind and snow, the middle-aged man quickly disappeared into the snowy street. Creak. The mottled door was pushed open and the biting cold wind rushed in. The middle-aged man quickly entered the house with the young man on his back and quickly locked the door. Only then did he feel some warmth. "Mother, we're back." As the child's voice sounded out, a young woman quickly walked out of the room. She wore sackcloth and there wasn't a single trace of makeup on her face. Although she wasn't a beauty, she looked like a pretty girl from a humble family. "Brother Sean, who is he?" When the young woman saw the young man on her husband's back, the young woman asked in surprise. "Mother, this big brother almost froze to death outside. Father and I saved him and brought him home. If you want to blame someone, blame Han." Knowing the situation of his family, the child was afraid that his mother would be dissatisfied. He quickly apologized to his mother. "Silly Han, saving people is a good thing. How can mother blame you?" The young woman smiled and gently stroked the child's hair. However, her smile was a bit forced. It wasn't that she didn't want to help this white-robed youth, but her family was already very poor. With another mouth to feed, it was hard to say if they could survive this winter. I'm sorry. This little brother," the middle-aged man's voice was slightly uneasy, but before he could finish speaking, the young woman quickly walked in front of him and whispered, "Saving a life is better than building a 7-storied pagoda. How could blame you? I'll go get Dr. Wang now." After saying this, the young woman put on a thick leather coat and walked out of the house. In the side room, the firewood in the stove burned brightly, giving people a feeling of extreme warmth. The black-clothed youth was lying on the bed. A gray-haired old man in his 60s was sitting on the edge of the bed, taking the youth's pulse. The family of 3 stood to the side, looking at the old man nervously. They didn't know if the youth could be saved. His pulse is in a mess. The cold air has already entered his body. This old man will write a prescription. Follow this prescription and go to the pharmacy next door to get the medicine. Boil 3 bowls of water into 1 bowl and give it to him every morning and night. After 7 consecutive days, he will wake up and save his life. Dr. Wang was the only traditional Chinese medicine doctor in the town. He was also a highly respected old man. He wrote down a prescription and handed it to the middle-aged man before getting up to leave. "Dr. Wang, I'm sorry to trouble you. Although this money isn't much, please accept it." The young woman took out a stack of crumpled notes and handed it to Dr. Wang. "You're all suffering people. The snow has sealed the sky, and your days are not easy. Let's just forget about the money." Dr. Wang declined and left. The family of 3 thanked him profusely. After Dr. Wang left, the couple was silent. The middle-aged man frowned and said, "Our family is not rich. These 7 days of medicine, Brother Sean, don't worry. Still has a pair of earrings. We can go to the pawn shop and exchange them for some money. Shwa, you can't do that. This is the only thing your mother left you. Before the middle-aged man could finish, the young woman smiled and said, "It's just a pair of earrings. It can save a life. This is nothing." 7 days later. It was snowing outside. The snow never stopped. In the house, the stove burned brightly. Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was a young face. Then, the whole house was filled with children's excited cheers. "Father, Mother, Big Brother is awake. He's awake." The sound of hurried footsteps could be heard. The couple quickly walked into the room. When they saw Yi Xian wake up, the worry between their brows disappeared. Yi Xian supported himself on the bed and slowly got up. He looked at the family of 3 in front of him. His eyes flashed with confusion. No one knew what he was thinking. In 10 years, Yi Xian traveled the mountains and rivers. He crossed deserts and oceans. He personally planted a sapling and witnessed the sapling's life from blooming to withering. He finally understood that what he had lost was the life of a mortal. He walked out of the Valley of 100 Flowers and hid his Tongtian cultivation. He turned himself into a mortal. He couldn't show any of his cultivation and acted like a mortal. In the end, he blended into the mortal world. When the snowstorm came, he also suffered from the bitter cold like a mortal and entered the small town in a daze. From the time he was saved by the middle-aged man until he woke up, Yi Xian had seen everything. However, he was extremely confused and couldn't understand why a poor family would save someone like him, who had never lived in his life, when the snow covered the sky and even his own life was a problem. Was human nature good? Was this the daily life of a mortal? Yi Xian kept asking himself. His eyes were filled with deep confusion. Didn't they know that this would bring great hardship to their lives? The heavens and the earth were a slaughterhouse, and all living things were pigs and dogs. Yi Xian was an all-heaven Xian immortal, and he viewed all living things as ants. He'd never cared about the thoughts of ants, but what this family of 3 had done today caused him to fall into deep confusion. "Little brother, the cold has entered your body. Drink this bowl of medicine and your body will recover faster." The middle-aged man brought over a bowl of steaming medicine. He helped Yi Xian up and fed the medicine to Yi Xian. The medicine was bitter and unbearable. Yi Xian frowned. He tasted the bitterness in the medicine carefully. It was as if he was feeling something he had never felt before. He couldn't explain it clearly, but a wisp of warmth quietly slipped through his frozen mind. "Little brother, who are you? Why are you wearing such thin clothes and walking alone in this world of ice and snow?" the young woman asked softly. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't respond. He just lowered his eyes. This made the family of 3 think that Yi Xian was extremely weak at the moment and even speaking was extremely difficult. This little brother has just recovered from a serious illness and his body is still very weak. "Let's let him have a good rest first," the middle-aged man said softly. "Big brother, you have to get better quickly." It was unknown when the child gently shook Yi Xian's arm, but his voice was incomparably real. "All right, Han, you should go back and do your homework. Don't disturb this little brother's rest." The middle-aged man took the child into his arms and then reminded Yi Xian. The family of 3 returned to their room. Chapter 338. The stove burned brightly, illuminating the room with a fiery red glow. Yi Xian was silent. He sat cross-legged, not a trace of qi emanating from his body, nor did he breathe in the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. It was as if he had turned into a mortal, searching for the answer in his heart. The mortal world trains the heart, the path of humanity. Why are these mortals so satisfied? Is this the life of mortals? Yi Xian murmured to himself. The confusion in his eyes deepened. Half a month later. The wind and snow finally stopped, and a ray of the rising sun illuminated the entire Clear Sky Town. The mortals in Clear Sky Town opened their doors one after another, and cheers and laughter could be heard from time to time. There were also many children piling up huge snowmen on both sides of the street, and this scene was very lively. The adults held brooms in their hands and swept away the snow. Many peddlers appeared on both sides of the street, constantly hawking their goods. A thriving atmosphere grew in the entire Clear Sky Town. In this half a month, Yi Xian had been thinking about the question in his heart. He had never answered the couple's questions. This made the couple sigh helplessly. They thought that Yi Xian's mind had been damaged by the wind and snow. The door opened. The air was clear. Yi Xian strolled out. He looked at the entire Clear Sky Town. His entire person seemed to have melded into the town. He calmly felt the chi of the mortal world around him. Big brother, you've just recovered from a serious illness. Quickly return to the house. Don't let the cold hurt your body again. An anxious child's voice rang out by Yi Xian's ear. He saw the child quickly walk over to Yi Xian. A pair of tender little hands constantly pulled at his arm. Clearly, he wanted to push him back into the house. Such a scene caused Yi Xian to be stunned into silence. His heart seemed to have been touched by something. His eyes were deep as he looked at the child in front of him. His gentle voice slowly sounded out from his mouth. What is your name? When he heard Yi Xian's words, the child was stunned. For the past half a month, no matter how his parents tried to talk to Yi Xian, he never responded at all. Yet now, he actually spoke. This caused the child's grip on Yi Xian's arm to freeze. My name is Li Han. After the child recovered from his shock, he quickly spoke up and looked at Yi Xian with curiosity in his eyes. Big brother, what's your name? Hearing the child's tender words, Yi Xian's eyes went blank. After a few breaths, a smile appeared on his face and he said, My name is Yi Xian. Yi as in leaves, Fan as in mortals. The conversation between the adult and child made the couple in the house quickly walk out. When they saw Yi Xian talking to the child, their eyes lit up with pleasant surprise. They quickly walked towards Yi Xian. Little brother, it seems that you have recovered well. We are relieved. The middle-aged man said with a smile. Thank you for saving me. Yi Xian will remember this kindness. Yi Xian cupped his hands and bowed to the couple. His gesture was not fake at all. If this scene was seen by others, they would be stunned and their jaws would drop. Yi Xian actually bowed to mortals. This was simply a fantasy. Brother, there is no need to be so polite. We are already very happy that you are alive. The young woman smiled and said. The weather has just turned warm. The cold is still too strong. Let's talk inside. The middle-aged man said as he helped Yi Xian back into the house. In the house, the stove was burning fiercely. The young woman shuttled back and forth between the room and the stove. Dishes were placed on the square table by her. Although they were all simple vegetarian dishes, under the young woman's exquisite culinary skills, they appeared extremely exquisite. The middle-aged man got a roasted chicken from somewhere. When he placed the roasted chicken in the middle of the table, Li Han's eyes revealed a look of desire. She even licked her lips unconsciously. It was obvious that this child had not eaten meat for a long time. Brother Yi, this is my family's homemade strong wine. Although it is not a good wine, you have just recovered from a serious illness. Drinking 2 cups will help to expel the remaining cold in your body. Li Shan carried a jar of wine and walked towards Yi Xian. His warm voice sounded. The bowls and chopsticks were placed neatly. The family of 3 sat opposite Yi Xian. When Li Shan poured the wine into the bowl, the strong aroma of the wine filled the air. Brother Yi, let me give you a toast. Li Shan raised his wine glass and clinked it with Yi Xian's bowl. He drank the wine in the bowl in one gulp. His cheeks were slightly flushed. When the strong wine entered his mouth, Yi Xian drank it in one gulp. This made Li Shan laugh out loud. Brother Yi looks thin and weak, but I see that your alcohol tolerance is extraordinary. I'm a natural drinker. I've embarrassed myself in front of Brother Li, Yi Xian said gently. As they drank more and more wine, the atmosphere gradually changed from unfamiliar to warm. The two of them gradually opened up a conversation. From his conversation with Li Shan, Yi Xian learned that Li Shan was a hunter. As long as the weather was clear, he would leave Clear Sky Town and go to the mountains outside to hunt and pick some mountain products to support his family of 3. However, with the recovery of the spirit qi of heaven and earth, the ferocious beasts in the mountains were extremely ferocious under the nourishment of the spirit qi. Li Shan did not dare to go deep into the mountains and could only wander around the outskirts of the mountains. His days were a little more austere. Li Shan's wife was called Xiaoruoxue. She took on some knitting work every day to add to the family's household expenses. She also taught Li Han to read and write every day. She had lived like this for so many years. Not only Li Shan's family, but the entire Qingshan town followed ancient customs because it was located in the northern highlands. Very few people from the outside world came to Qingshan town. It was not an exaggeration to say that this place was an otherworldly place. It was an ordinary and simple family. Everything was trivial. Yi Xian tasted the dishes on the table from time to time, quietly listened to Li Shan's words, and communicated with him from time to time. However, this made Yi Xian and the family seem to be very harmonious. Time passed, but Yi Xian found something strange. The family of 3 in front of him was only eating the vegetarian dishes on the table. The fatty roast chicken was not touched at all. This made Yi Xian ponder, and the confusion in his eyes deepened. Han this drumstick is for you. Yi Xian's thoughts turned. He personally peeled off a drumstick and put it in the child's bowl. The fragrance of the roasted chicken caused the child to continuously swallow his saliva. There was a faint look of longing in his eyes, but when the child saw his parents secretly shake their heads at him, the longing in his eyes instantly faded away. Big brother, Han doesn't like to eat drumsticks. Big brother, you eat it. The child picked up the drumstick from the bowl and quickly put it in Yi Xian's bowl. However, the disappointment in his eyes was completely seen by Yi Xian. Brother Yi, our family usually eats vegetarian food. Our stomachs can't be stained with oil or fish. I'm afraid that after eating it, we'll have to run to the toilet for the whole night, Li Shan said half-jokingly. Chapter 339. Yi Xian was silent. He picked up the chicken drumstick and placed it in the child's bowl again. He looked at the child with a gentle gaze and said, I appreciate Brother Li's kindness, but Han is still growing. I don't think there's any harm in eating some meat. Yi Xian's voice was resolute and decisive, causing the couple to bitterly smile helplessly. After that, they vaguely nodded towards the child. This also caused Li Han-er's face to be filled with joy. She directly took the meat in her bowl and left the house. Her tender voice also sounded out. Han is done eating. I'm going back to my room to do my homework. Brother, please enjoy your meal with father and mother. This scene made Yi Xian smile. Li Shan raised his wine cup again. The couple chatted with Yi Xian again. However, under the couple's strong request, Yi Xian should eat more meat since he had just recovered from a serious illness. Yi Xian had no choice but to eat the entire roast chicken. The night was like water, and the cold wind howled outside. Li Shan was completely drunk, and the couple returned to their room. Only Yi Xian was left sitting cross-legged on the bed, constantly feeling the strange emotions this family brought to him. It was late at night and everything was quiet. Yi Xian finally fell asleep like a mortal. However, a strange sound suddenly came from outside. Although it was not loud, it fell into his ears very well. Yi Xian opened his eyes and walked off the bed. When he pushed open the door, the scene that entered his eyes caused him to be stunned on the spot, unable to recover for a long time. Beside the stove, Li Han was sobbing. Broken porcelain bowls were scattered on the ground. The child's little hand was cut by the broken pieces of the porcelain bowl, and blood was flowing out. It was a sight that would make one's heart tremble. Li Han was crying, but not because of the injury on his hand. He looked at the dusty chicken drumstick on the ground in a daze. His voice was choked with sobs. He picked up the drumstick with his bleeding hand and used his sleeve to wipe the dust off the drumstick. However, the more the child wiped, the dirtier the drumstick became. This caused the child to fall to the ground, and uncontrollable sobs came from his mouth. At this moment, Yi Xian's heart froze. He slowly walked to Li Han's side and looked at the child with his deep eyes. Han, don't cry. Yi Xian's appearance caused Li Hainer to bite her lips. She seemed to have found someone to confide in, and her choked voice sounded in Yi Xian's ears. Han just wants to leave the drumstick for Mother. Mother is weak and sickly. She hasn't eaten meat for a long time. The child's voice was choked with sobs, and he was already choking with sobs. Time seemed to have stopped, and space seemed to have frozen. Yi Xian stood where he was, staring at the drumstick in the child's hand. His entire being became deathly still, and the sound of his breathing became extremely heavy. A heartache he had never felt before rose in Yi Xian's heart. Yi Xian was unaware of this emotion. He just stared blankly at the child in front of him. His frozen heart was greatly touched. This feeling was indescribable and indescribable. Brother Yi, I'm sorry. A weak female voice sounded out from behind Yi Xian. Unknowingly, the child's mother had appeared here. She took out a gauze and carefully bandaged the wound on the child's palm. The way she looked at the child was filled with a motherly love. Mother, I'm sorry. The child clutched the drumstick in his hand tightly, and sobs came from his mouth. Mother naturally understands Han's feelings, but this drumstick is already dirty. Let's not take it, okay? The child's mother spoke softly, comforting Li Han. She even gave Yi Xian an apologetic look. But, this drumstick is the one Big Brother gave to Han. Han wants to leave it for Mother. Food can't be eaten if it's dirty. Mother appreciates Han's filial piety. When Han grows up, I'll buy good food for Mother every day, okay? The scene in front of him made Yi Xian take a deep breath. However, his fists were clenched tightly. He then walked to the mother and son's side. Under the mother and son's surprised gaze, Yi Xian took the drumstick in the child's hand and slowly put the dusty drumstick into his mouth. Brother Yi, you. Such a scene made the child's mother cry out in shock. Yi Xian chewed and swallowed the drumstick bite by bite. It was as if he wasn't eating the drumstick. It was as if he was eating life. It contained the joys and sorrows of mortals, and it also contained Li Han's true feelings. When he finished eating the drumstick, Yi Xian stroked the child's hair and said in a low voice, Han, this is the best food Big Brother has ever eaten. Time passed, and Yi Xian settled down in Clear Sky Town. Yi Xian opened a private school in Clear Sky Town and became a teacher. Li Han was his first student. As time passed, many parents in the town sent their children to the private school. As tuition, they received some meat, vegetables, and linen clothes. 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. Where there were people, there would be Jianghu. Where there was Jianghu, there would be grievances. This sentence was even more applicable to cultivators. In these 10 years, the outside world had undergone earth-shaking changes. Millions of cultivators died tragically in the void, and the Immortal Cultivation Alliance became history. This also caused many immortal cultivation sects to rise. They wantonly recruited disciples from the outside world, and following that, the immortal cultivation sects attacked each other just to rise in the human world. From time to time, cultivators who passed by Clear Sky Town would talk about some interesting things in the outside world. This made the mortals in the town yearn for it, and they even knelt and kowtowed to the cultivators. 10 years. It was neither long nor short. Yi Xian did not appear in the world for 20 years. Other than Fatso Huang and the others who were still looking for his whereabouts, the world had gradually forgotten his existence. The world was vast and boundless. When a force was destroyed, there would naturally be another force to replace it. In the long river of history, there had never been a lack of people with peerless talent. Many heaven-gifted geniuses appeared out of nowhere, and various major immortal sects rose up in the mortal world. They fought against each other just to become the number one orthodoxy in the mortal world and replace the former Immortal Cultivation Alliance. However, Yi Xian's name was no longer in the world, and there were also fewer hot topics for the world to discuss. When the Immortal Cultivation Alliance was destroyed, the major immortal cultivation sects were still afraid that the underworld would reappear in the world and replace the Immortal Cultivation Alliance. However, 20 years later, the underworld had not been rebuilt, and Yi Xian had never appeared in the eyes of the world. In fact, even if Yi Xian did not appear in the human world, Fatso Huang could also rebuild the underworld and suppress the entire human world. However, Fatso Huang listened to Yi Xian's instructions. Since the underworld no longer existed, there was no need for it to appear in the human world. The world finally came to a conclusion that Yi Xian was a real immortal. He would not care about the cultivation resources of the human world at all. Perhaps he had already returned to the legendary immortal world. This rumor became more and more widespread, which also made the major immortal cultivation sects put down their fear of Yi Xian and began to fight each other, all wanting to become the number one orthodoxy in the human world. Chapter 340. In Qingtian town, the sky was clear for thousands of miles. Spring was blooming. Today was a beautiful day of spring. In front of a 3-story private school, Yi Xian, in his middle-aged appearance, reclined peacefully on a rocking chair. Bathing in the rare spring sunshine, he seemed to have really blended in with his mortal identity. From time to time, he would emit an aura of elegance. At first glance, one would feel that this was a man of profound knowledge. "Uncle Yi, Han has returned to see you." A sturdy young man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Looking at his cultivation level, he was actually a cultivator of the 9th realm. Just one more step and he would enter the foundational level. From then on, he would enter the ranks of cultivators. 10 years had passed, and the former child had turned into a young man. Looking at his appearance, he was 60% similar to his father. They were both upright and selfless, just as simple and pure. Yi Xian stood up from the rocking chair and smiled kindly. "You little brat, you've been gone for 3 years. You've made your brother and sister-in-law worried sick. If it weren't for the fact that cultivators are running amok in the outside world, I'm afraid your parents would have caught you and given you a good beating." Yi Xian's reprimanding words made Li Han embarrassed. She then giggled and said, "Uncle Yi, you know me best. In this world, cultivators are the most respected. 3 years ago, I secretly ran away from home and went out to find a master. I told you about it because I didn't want my parents to worry about me. Shan, come and greet Uncle Yi." Li Han moved to the side and saw a young girl with picturesque features appear behind her. A trace of shyness flashed across her face as she bowed towards Yi Xian and said, "Yang Shanshan greets Uncle Yi." "Ha!" Looking at the young girl in front of him, Yi Xian laughed heartily. "Good boy, you've really grown up. It seems that Uncle Yi will be attending your wedding." Following Yi Xian's words, the young girl's face was full of shyness. She hid behind Li Han, causing Li Han, to laugh even more. Her eyes were full of happiness. 10 years had passed, and Li Han-er's home was completely new. A very spacious courtyard house was built. At this moment, Yi Xian was drinking with Li Shan and his wife in the courtyard. Li Han-er and the young girl sat on the side, and from time to time, they would laugh and talk. In these 10 years, Yi Xian didn't have any other hobbies. He only had a special liking for the strong wine brewed by Li Shan. If he didn't drink 2 cups a day, he would feel that something was missing. Time flew by. In these 10 years, Lu Xian's cold temperament had disappeared, and he seemed more and more like an ordinary person. He was well aware of this change, but he could faintly feel that he was undergoing a qualitative transformation. Han-er, these years when you weren't home, your Uncle Yi helped us a lot. This courtyard house was also built by your Uncle Yi. In the future, when your Uncle Yi is old, you must be filial to your Uncle Yi, just like how you are filial to your parents. Li Shan's face was red as he lectured Li Han-er. Father, you've said this more than 10 times. Now that I've returned, I don't plan to leave. I'll stay by your side with Shan, Li Han-er said solemnly. Han, you're simple and honest. You're not suitable for this cruel world. Uncle Yi is very happy that you're willing to stay by your parents' side, Yi Xian said gently. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Li Han-er smiled bitterly and said, Uncle Yi, the outside world is very exciting, but I know my own limits. I'm afraid I won't be able to step into the Aurus core stage in this lifetime. I'm also deeply afraid that one day I'll die outside and never see you again. Child, you're talking nonsense. What death? As long as you can come back, it's fine. Sister-in-law Li reprimanded. 10 years had passed, and she had become much older. There were some white hairs growing at her temples. The family banquet finally came to an end. A few months later, under the witness of Yi Xian and Li Shan, Li Han married the young girl. That day, Yi Xian drank a lot. In his drunken state, Li Han personally helped him back to his residence. However, the drunk Yi Xian's words weren't clear, and he kept muttering some strange words, causing Xiao Han to be slightly surprised. This was because the things that Yi Xian muttered actually gave him a faint feeling of a breakthrough in his cultivation. When this feeling faded away, Li Han only treated it as her own misconception. The daily routine of mortals was always the same. Li Han and her husband had built a courtyard house next to Lu Xian's residence. Li Han had also opened a martial arts dojo. With her cultivation at the 9th level of qi refining, teaching some children martial arts was a simple matter. Time flew by, and time passed by. Everyone would eventually die, let alone the fragile lives of mortals. This was the way of reincarnation, and no one could change it. 50 years later. Yi Xian's hair was white. Wrinkles piled up on his face. His straight back was bent, and his entire body bloomed with the feeling of the setting sun. On this day, the sound of weeping never stopped. White silk hung all over the Li residence. Li Shan passed away peacefully. As the lid of his coffin was slowly closed, Li Han and her husband sobbed. Their daughter also kept crying for her grandfather. Sister-in-law Li turned into a white-haired old woman. She was very calm about her husband's passing. It was as if she had already predicted that this day would come. Brother Yi, we're both old. It seems that it won't be long before we can reunite in the underworld. Sister-in-law Li said hoarsely as she leaned on her walking stick. Cough cough. Yi Xian kept coughing. Li Han kept stroking Yi Xian's back, trying to alleviate his pain. Everyone will eventually die. My condolences, sister-in-law. Yi Xian's voice was extremely old. Snow fluttered in the evening, and the world was cold. This was a vast snowstorm that covered the entire clear sky town. In Yi Xian's 70 years of life as a mortal, this was the second time such a snowstorm had happened. The first time it happened was when Yi Xian had just arrived at Clear Sky Town. Time was like a blade that cut down all geniuses. Yi Xian had forgotten a lot, but he had also gained a lot. He had forgotten his previous name. He didn't know who Yi Xian was, nor did he know who the East Emperor was. His name was Yi Fan. Yi as in leaves, Fan as in ordinary. He was just an ordinary teacher, drifting with the flow of the mortal world. This year's snowstorm was especially heavy. The snow on the streets was a few feet thick. The citizens of Clear Sky Town had all disappeared from the streets. They were all alone in their homes, warming up by the stove and drinking a few cups of warm liquor, just like every time a snowstorm came. Yi Xian's residence, in a private school on the 3rd floor. A few stoves were burning brightly, illuminating the entire house red. Yi Xian wore a thick leather coat and was warming himself by the stove. There was even a naive little girl circling around him, swinging his arm from time to time and calling him Grandpa Yi Xian. Cece, go back to sleep. Don't disturb your Grandpa Yi anymore. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.